investigation of Adam Newman and Mark Andreessen's Flow. And so Jason and I did sort of an early a launch 3-hour exhaustive sort of looking into sort of smart environments. And the first section was looking at Flow as, like, is it a real estate company or a technology company? And if it's a technology company, is it a singularity company? Because sort of linking back through Mayosi-san and SoftBank's backing of that and their very clear intention of getting enough data to trigger the singularity. So we were sort of laying out what it looks like for like people living in multifamily smart housing and how that fits into like the larger program of like WeWork spinning out their Smart Cities initiative into Flow. And so for the second installment, I'm joined by Leo Saraceno. So hi, Leo.
Hey.
And if you've been following some of the work we've been doing, we just, a couple weeks ago, Leo, Jason, and I did sort of a revisiting of some of the token engineering around the environment and the commons, and like some of the ritualistic aspects of that tied to Curve Labs and some work that Leo's been doing looking into Collectivo and Cello. So for Leo, for people who haven't met you before, can you just say a few words about like your interest and what you've been working on?
Sure. So I guess, let's see. So, I mean, originally, I guess I was interested, like, maybe 5 years ago in like cryptocurrency stuff. So I was 19 and not interested, or college wasn't making me too interested. And I was like, all right, let's see what else is going on. And then like, so I fell into it. And at that point, this was 2017. And, a lot of people, all the stories that were going on at that point were about, financial corruption and the banks and all this other stuff and fractional reserve banking and these sorts of stories. And I found that interested and like got involved in stuff, and eventually went back and forth and was involved in a project called MakerDAO, and which is one of the larger like financial smart contract based things on Ethereum, but never really being quite sure like what this really was or like what was really happening. I definitely was like something was happening, and even like with the people building it, I don't think they knew exactly what they're doing or what was going on. And it's like pretty chaotic. I feel like sometimes like you do this and there is sort of an overarching theme or plan or trajectory, but I do feel like sometimes it's just pretty chaotic, and people are just like doing stuff, and then
and you came in looking at like the smart contract piece specifically. I mean, because I think like within blockchain there are a lot of people who came in the door of like the investment side of things, but if
for me what I was most interested in was governance, like what is governance in the smart contract system in blockchain, because like that was the whole like philosophical or ethical proposition that those people were arguing, was that they're like, by putting the economy and finance on blockchain and having it like governed by the people or decentralized, that was like a better system or more moral system than like what had been going on.
More transparent.
So more transparent. You have control or whatever, and more democratic, like all those sorts of things. So I was like, okay, well, like, what does that actually mean? Is that actually true? What is power? Like, where is power in these systems? How does that work? Like, getting into all that nitty gritty, and that's what I primarily, or that was like my main focus when I was interested in like MakerDAO and those sorts of things. But then later on, eventually, I think I had left. I was totally done at, I'm not sure, like 2020 or something. I think it was before I'd seen your work, maybe I'm not sure. But I was like, okay, yeah, this is bullshit. Like, this is just for me when I was like, I was starting to study a lot more like just how computers work and like operating systems and getting down into like binary, like, and that's sort of like what clicked it for me. It's like, this is all, you're building this like giant structure just basically on top of binary mathematics, and that being like the basis of your reality. And that sort of, that just seemed like fundamentally not somewhere that we necessarily that we want to go or is healthier.
Well, and you're sort of, you have a perspective around like nature because you had other experiences that were more about the natural world, right? Which covered.
Yeah, and like when I was doing this stuff, I would, like I would, for all the like the 4 summers during and preceding living in the woods, doing like trail work and working as like a caretaker and like out on the long trail in Vermont and working on farms or doing other things, and like being outside and with plants is, a big part of my life. And
well, so like that's a perfect connection for you've really been spending about like the past year really doing this deep dive into like the environmental movement and tokenization and like how the governance, right, or how they're going to empower the land with wallets.
Yeah, exactly. It's like this whole, I guess, and that leads in. So what I forgot that I didn't explain that. So what I've been doing for probably, like you said, the last year or so is pretty much figuring out how all this Web3 stuff is being applied, or justifying certain types of like environmental conservation financial practices, and putting this sort of cybernetic system and applying it to land use and land management and all that, and carbon credits. This phrase ecosystem services is sort of like the broad umbrella that I kind of put it under, but there's a lot of different words like natural asset, natural capital, green bonds, different sorts of things that are all kind of the same. But
so that's how our work kind of complements each other, because I have more the people side of things, like the human anthropocentric, and you have the nature. But because my initial framing before I even ran into all of the blockchain ledger, distributed ledger technology stuff, it was looking at the pay for success finance and the policy goals, and this idea of having like transmitting life onto metrics on a data dashboard, and then using this essentially what is a digital simulation to justify like things in the real world. And I saw it in the context of children and test scores. Like you would probably see it in the environment in terms of like sustainable energy and carbon decarbonization, but it's still the same kind of overall,
the same exact thing.
The same thing. And but like even within like going into the lockdowns and looking at like the World Bank's One Health program and these ideas that they're going to interlock the human world with the environment and use different cost offsets in the simulations. So they'll construct various things on data dashboards to say if we do these things, we will be healthier, or we will create more sustainability according to the 17 goals. And so there is this really dynamic relationship between human behavior and activity and how it's represented on a dashboard, and then the ecosystem services, right? Because ecosystem services are in part reframed as, well, what does nature do for people? Like, how does it benefit us, right? And so it has to be translated into some sort of digital representation.
Yeah, it has to be turned into some metric. The common ones will be water purification, like this river wetland does $50 million worth of water purification services every year, and then
how about bees?
This much carbon, and
like pollination services, right?
Yeah, pollinations. Yeah, bees. That's a big one. Air quality. Yeah, and all those sorts of things. And it's biodiversity. That's one that I've been like trying to figure out more on how they even do that, or like what that means, because they can't, like, for all the studies that they're working on for creating metrics for biodiversity, they're only doing like warm-blooded like vertebrates and plants, big plants. It's like they can't even do the things that
they tell a big story about. I guess.
Yeah. they tell a big story. I mean, and of course they are like trying to figure out more intense ways of like capturing all the insects and seeing everything at once. And we'll probably get into that. 'Cause it's all pretty much going on in the Netherlands and of course other places, but they're really.
And the
really
interesting thing
it.
is, like the Netherlands, right? Like if you keep thinking back to Dutch East India Company, right? And resources, right? You know, first it's spices or then, you know, but even botany and plants, right? But now it's not plants transmitted through seeds or roots or rootstock or things that you would, it's actually just the molecular structure. You know, if we can get all of that into our databases, then we can play with it, right? And, you know, build things, whatever their chimeric intentions are.
Yeah,
it's kind of
exactly.
wild.
And then on the like what you're talking about, the cost stuff. Yeah, I mean, I guess we should probably get into the slides.
Well, no. Well, I
like
just want to say, I know. I'm gonna. We don't have to do all of them. If you run out of time, I'll just like do the Death
I got
March
3 hours.
Okay.
That's what I said.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is like when we're looking at flow, this idea that people and the environment are intertwined in the simulation dashboards. Like there's probably like we each have our own simulation dashboards, and then there's oracles or integrations of the simulation dashboards, and then we're like, well, how do people benefit the environment? Well, how does the environment benefit people? And all of that becomes part of this, you know, a really insidious financial game. And not just financial, but you've done a lot of work, and I think you said the next piece that you're going to be working on is about risk, you know, insurance modeling. So it's not just whatever the simulation says, but it's also financial games around risk and chance and gambling, which is what I've been working on lately, is like the decision theory. So this is a clip we pulled some. Jason, we did a little watch of this a Hulu special about WeWork. So some of the clips are going to be from a talk that Mark Andreessen did with Adam Newman, formerly of WeWork. Now they're partners in this Flow project. And then there was a documentary. There's been a lot of public digital material directed at Adam Newman and his wife and the implosion of WeWork. And I think there's a reason that they want it in the public's eye, because there's a certain story they're telling that actually is going to help obscure the next story or help allow people to discount the seriousness of this next venture. So in this one, it's a short clip, and he's talking about like how this is how we work. How we work will change how people interact. But once you realize that early in the process, they knew that they're really in the data business, and they were looking to expand the lessons that they learned in the office setting to like at the neighborhood level in terms of a smart environment, and doing that later through education, which I'm going to talk with Lynn about, and like multifamily housing, which I'm going to talk with Cliff about more later. But this idea of changing how people interact is also changing their behavior in connection with the finance deals and the simulation technologies that we're talking about.
Like I had moved to New York to find my dreams, and here I was really, really kind of lost. The friend reached out to me and said, I have a friend who has a startup and he's looking for an assistant. Are you interested? And I got connected to Adam. I walked in and Adam was super casual, very laid back, very charismatic from the moment I saw him. And he's very tall, and so he has a like very commanding presence. And he's also really, really, he's really friendly.
So our founder, Adam Newman.
And he was giving me a tour of the space, and I was interviewing at the same time, and we were just talking about their dream of what WeWork would become.
But we gotta put something that we can grow into, we have to think half a year forward, if not a year.
This is not just about changing the way people work. We're gonna change, ultimately, every facet of the way that people interact.
And so I would hazard a guess that your 19-year-old self, like in the space, is looking at governance. Like probably, like most of people were there with very ambitious and optimistic ideas, and I think that's really central to the space. Is that like we're taking our power back, right? We're gonna.
Yeah, this is gonna empower you to, really make your dreams come true or whatever.
Together, right? Like the goodness of like everyone working on this new exciting project. And I guess East Denver is happening this week. And, from what I hear from Jason or whatever, like, it's like they don't know what they're building. They really don't. Like they're I mean, there's some may, like, I'm sure people at the top, probably Haquan Lau.
Yeah, like Trent,
Trent
McGonaghy and stuff.
Yeah, those guys know. But I mean, I think probably if you went in and like chatted the lobby and asked people if they knew about cybernetics and simulation modeling, like there's some tokenomics engineers that probably would do that. They might not understand that there's like concerns around actually doing the steering. But I don't think most people who are just building apps, that's forefront in how they think about, like, we're going to change everything about how you interact. So this is when I
realize that they're becoming pretty much like the product, like with WeWork, those dreams are essentially the product, the data that comes from people like intensively trying to make whatever they want to make. And same with the people at East Denver don't realize that they're
maybe in retrospect they'll realize what it was. But so before we started recording today, I was telling you this is something I'm going to get into a little bit more detail on the next session with Lynn, because it's largely situated in Texas and it has to do with the energy systems. But when I was in the education space, I kept bumping into these major like oil and gas companies being involved in education. And at first I thought was like, oh, well, they just want to train a workforce to be better, geologists or petroleum engineers or something, or maybe they're trying to get out of petroleum and get into something else. But I didn't really understand that this is ultimately about an energy exchange. And I think I wanted to pull up this map, which is something that I had developed early on, but it's talking about the history of General Electric and Charles Proteus Steinmetz, who was a brilliant engineer working in alternating current and in electrical systems. He worked and encouraged Thomas Edison to develop a global research lab in Schenectady, New York. And so he was actually had more of a socialist outlook and was later became part of this Technical Alliance or Technocracy Incorporated. And so that's something that, there's quite a bit of, focus on. Patrick Wood talks about technocracy. There's certain isms or labels that have been applied. What I would say is if we understand it, like a lot of the people who promote what is happening as a technocratic overreach, also it comes with a lot of baggage around like nationalism, or the US is being attacked from the outside and we have to stand up against the technocrats. And that isn't situated within the true origins of the technocracy movement, which was birthed out of like, GE and Thomas Edison, who was working closely with the US military in the First World War on radar and all sorts of other things. Like it's definitely a corporate governance model. And part of the technocracy movement, it was centered on a survey, energy surveys. And actually they were proposing an energy current, an energy credit currency back in the 1930s. So there was this early model of this energy credit that synced with this guy M. King Hubbert, who was colleagues with Howard Scott, who really was sort of the main personality behind the technocracy movement for a time until he fell into disfavor. But M. King Hubbert, he was a petroleum engineer and a physicist from Houston. And he was the one who in 1956 actually developed this idea of peak oil. So the peak oil theory came out of the US, out of Texas specifically, early in 1956. And then he later went on to help develop a research hub for Shell Oil in Houston, and they were working on the early offshore oil wells. So, and I think energy, the management of energy as a tokenized system is really important. And I'm going to get into this a little bit later with Lynn, but looking at creating exchanges of values that have to do with decarbonization, green energy, and linking the human behaviors into the environmental impacts. And that all of this goes back, I can see it tracing back to these early 1930s with the GE Research Lab, which was really underpinned by, military investment, because there was a lot of crossover between that. And now GE is working a lot in like digital health, and wearables. So you can see that direct colonization of your body by the technology. I don't know. Does that make sense, Leo, in terms of?
Yeah, I mean, it totally does. And seeing like, they frame it as like tokenization of impact or like of some action, whether that's an action that is growing a plant that will bring in a certain amount of carbon and produce a certain amount of biomass and help bring in other organisms. It's all viewed as actions that, like, when you abstract it all the way out, it's just energy. That's how you define actions, is energy exchange directed energy. So the idea that, it just makes perfect sense what you're saying, that an energy credit would be kind of the overarching concept that relates all these different tokens that are being exchanged, which on the surface seem like different things, or you wouldn't think about them as energy. They are. And a lot of people define money as energy, as like potential energy. So it's all,
Well, and I have a slide about this a little bit later, but that was one of the things that was really important that I got out of your work about looking at the Atomic Energy Commission and the radioisotope tracing, was this idea of metabolism, like an ecosystem as an energy exchange like unit with all these different niches. And again, this is going to link back eventually into the circular economy and this idea that everything needs to be balanced in this homeostasis. But you actually, in order to get your hands on the levers, you have to be able to track it and be able to like open circuits and close circuits and keep things in balance. And in the 1930s or 1956, they didn't yet have a technology available to enact that level of control over people. And then I don't really honestly think that they're there yet, but this idea of a distributed ledger. And again, like they always say, oh, you don't plant a tree for yourself, you plant it for future generations, right? But like in this imagined future that they have with tokens, like you would get a token for planting, X number of trees, and then maybe your descendants would get some sort of microcredits based on the fact that you had planted the trees, because they would theoretically, if they're able to, create these ledgers the way they say they are. Now, I'm not sure that they can, but in their mind, they would think like, oh, like, I'm benefiting from the payout of my great grandparents, like planting of a walnut orchard or something.
Right. Yeah. It's like putting some, a weird way of an inheritance between generations and stuff. Well, and the thing,
oh, good.
You go.
No, I was just going to say, because I can see this, because in the school system, what they want to do is credit teachers for the economic impact of the students.
Right.
And so in that same way that a teacher would have a token or something assigned to all the people that you taught, and you would get some sort of percentage of the economic output of your students. And then when students are looking for a teacher, soon it'll just be a mentor, or maybe it'll just be an AI bot, but they're going to look for like which one gives the highest return on investment.
Yeah, which
right?
has had the most impacted for students over time.
It's so crazy.
Yeah. I'd say like what is a little different that I'm seeing happen in like the environmental space is that, and like specifically this is happening through this one project, Collectivo, but I think it's pretty much where things will go, is that it's not just the like carbon credit token is what will be the like financial incentive for people to do this. It's also the like all the data rights that for that piece of land that you have your like tokenized ownership of. That will be a big part of like what actually monetizes these things, just having like the right to that data that's used to verify the ecosystem service, whether it's carbon credits or other things. Like that data is
that's a commodity.
Valuable. Yeah, it's a commodity. Exactly. So.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, and they're wanting to use it to feed artificial general intelligence. I mean, that's what Ocean Protocol and Singularity Net and these places are about. Yeah. It's like organizing enough data to try to, I don't know, wake this thing up. And so when I first started looking at Flow, the multifamily housing development program, and then I saw that Flow, and it's interesting because in the talk that the interview that Mark Andreessen and Adam Newman are having, I guess it was last year when they launched. It was like last August, but they just released like footage from this talk within the past month. And it's so chatty, like, oh, you know, I didn't even know who Mark Andreessen was, but he called me up. And after all that stuff happened with WeWork, he's like, hey man, like just get back up. Let me know if you want some support. Cause like we might be interested. Right? It all just seems so serendipitous. Like, you know, it's just such a story that's being seeded. And then when I saw that they were like deeply like already enmeshed, the first funding round for Flow Carbon was before Flow was even launched. So like, you know, I don't know. Like it seems like
are they the same company?
No, I think they're I mean, who knows how exactly they're structured, right? Like, in fact, this footage in the talk, they were really hedging on like not really telling people what it was. In fact, part of the talk that what Newman says in the talk was like, oh, I thought I was going to get by without actually having to say anything about what I was doing for another day. So there, and that he didn't want to talk about it because as soon as you talk about it, then you open yourself up to critique. And so as long as you don't actually say anything about it, then it's hard to critique something that you don't actually say what it is, because then no one can have an opinion. So everything was like really obscured, even up until that talk, but they're not saying what they're really, really doing. So my understanding is this is a different enterprise, but it may be an umbrella. You know, maybe it'll be like under WeWork they had We Grow, which was the education unit, and then they had We Live, and then eventually it came under the unit of the We Company. So to me, it seems like a similar thing. Like we have these little spinoffs, but looking at the carbon credit trading here, and then seeing that. I'll just read the description. Flow Carbon, a pioneering and climate technology company working to build market infrastructure in the voluntary carbon market, VCM. Today announced it has raised $70 million in venture capital funding and its sale of carbon-backed tokens. The funding round was led by A16Z, which is Andreessen Horowitz, crypto, and also includes General Catalyst, Samsung Next, Invesco, Private Capital, 166 Second, which is Adam Newman's family foundation. Oh, I can't remember. I can't see that one. Something Ashley Levinson, Kevin Turin, RSC Ventures, and Allegory Labs. Other participants in the token sale include Fifth Wall, Box Group, and Cello Foundation. So, not only is it A16Z, but it's specifically Cello is involved. And maybe, Leo, can you say a few words about that? Because I know you've done quite a series that touches on Cello for Silicon Icarus.
Yeah. I actually didn't realize that. I think I had misread that before. I didn't realize that Cello itself had invested in Flow Carbon. But,
or the tokens. I guess I don't know what that even means. Like they were involved in the token sale.
Oh, yeah.
It looks like they got money or tokens.
Pretty much means that they funded them somehow.
Yeah.
Which investing in them. But yeah, so Cello's they're a blockchain platform that came out of these people that worked at the MIT Media Lab, specifically Seb Kamfar. And as you've talked about a lot, he does the Wildflower Montessori school system, which is basically like mass surveillance of little children, calling it school and
computer,
under, the Montessori,
Montessori computer,
having wearable slippers and tracking their movements,
beacons,
all these different things.
Yeah.
And he also worked at Google before, and I think he had some, I forget the specific algorithm, but
I think he improved the personalization algorithm. Like he did some sort of upgrade to their.
Mm-hmm. And so, but the blockchain mostly came, or in its early days, came out of the World Food Program's Innovation Fund. And from then, they're basically their main marketing shtick is that they're a blockchain with values called regenerative finance. So they want to bring, natural relationships back into the blockchain, and they do this through.
Because AI wants to know how you get along with people.
Yeah, exactly. And tokenizing natural assets and being involved in the whole impact finance gambit of the world of NGOs and humanitarian aid, ed tech, and all these different areas. And they have a lot of different projects in those areas, from UBI to tokenizing natural assets, and
it's beautiful money.
Mercy. Yeah, it's beautiful money.
Backed by things we love.
Yeah, their whole thesis is that, if, how they put it, that when the thing that backs money, well, the people will always make more of, or like find more of. So if you have money backed by nature, people will make more nature, grow the environment,
or toddlers.
Do things. They're regenerative. Yeah, toddlers. But really, it's just having money be backed by a cybernetic, like, machine, inside out robot.
Yeah,
that
and it can track
the whole world and
the relation,
like track
exchange.
Everything.
Yeah.
That tracks the atmosphere, the plants, the trees, the people, all business relationships, all transactions, all economics, education, identity, pretty much all movement of pretty much anything that you can imagine or anything that is regulated, or like could be regulated, like falls under law.
And it's interesting to me that it started off in the food program, because a lot of these, because again, if you think back to metabolism or energy, like at the base, like food is the fuel that runs living systems. So like the input is the input of energy and like food into the metabolic system.
Yeah, and that the World Food Program ran but it's probably still the largest like blockchain database for identity in the world. I would guess. I forget the name of it now. Is that because they put over 1 million refugees on blockchain identity for food vouchers and all that.
And the trick is, I've been, Cliff and I had this conversation around sort of like evil and organized, like the Judeo-Christian covenant, this Naomi Wolf thing. But like, I keep trying to emphasize like the role of institutionalized faith communities in this. And like, once you understand that quote unquote humanitarian aid systems and how they're being integrated with the cybernetics, like many so-called humanitarian programs are actually interconnected to faith communities, whether it be the Catholic Church or the Lutherans or also LDS. And like, I know a lot of their charitable work, it seems to be like veering into ways that will be integrated into this. So
Mercy Corps is a big one that I've looked at, and they work with Cello quite a bit with that. And I'm not sure if they're Catholic. I think they're Protestant, but very religious origins or have all sorts of intense cybernetic technology, especially around agriculture.
Yeah.
AI micro work for split people whose lives got shut down by
exactly
health event.
Like if people are paying attention and being reflective about how things have gone the last couple years, like we understand the importance of the plot line, right? Like the power in commanding people's attention and creating a story of sense making that people occupy and then can either keep them contained, like within a story and within a certain community. And so if you can manage people's attention in certain ways, and I'm also saying that this applies to people who would identify as the resistance at this point, because they imagine that they're like fighting the propaganda, and yet actually they're really amplifying a different storyline. If you set down the propaganda label and say like, what story are we crafting? And it's interesting because the implosion of WeWork got so much coverage, and it's still getting coverage like years later. It's still uplifted in the public thought layer, like why we need to focus on, and not just the company, a little bit maybe behind the backers of the company, but primarily around Adam Neumann and somewhat secondarily his wife as these public figureheads. And I think, and people are like, we just don't even know what happened. We don't know. That's a crazy unicorn thing. Like how does that even happen? And, Jason, we've talked about it quite a bit. Like it happened because it's meant to happen, like for the power structure to advance the next game. So if you may not understand exactly how it advances the power structure, but you should be thoughtful in knowing if it happened for a reason. Nobody gave WeWork $47 billion valuation because Adam Neumann was a smooth talker and he was tall and he commanded the room or something. Like nobody does that. But I think that this headline, which is from May, so he came out with the flow multifamily housing thing in August. So this is earlier. This is the flow carbon. And the title of this article is WeWork co-founder Adam Newman's new crypto project, which is the flow carbon, sounds like a scam within a scam. And then turning carbon credits into crypto won't fix climate change. And so I'm curious how you think about it, because I've really been trying to sort of deconstruct both like why the FTX things happened, like why the crypto scam, like what function do the scam stuff of crypto, like high profile, how do they serve the next phase of the plan that's coming? Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I have great like coherent thoughts about that, but I think on one level, I think what you said about attention is really important, that it directs people, it makes, you can have headlines like this and articles, and it's just a way to take people's attention, is having these far out things that fall apart or don't fall apart and whatnot.
Well, in terms of like the commoning, so I think like in some ways this is meant to distract, like, oh, crypto tokenized decarbon isn't a thing. How stupid. It must be a scam. Tokenizing, putting carbon credits on blockchain, dumb, right? And so then you just write it off without actually saying, well, what is the hit? Like there are many things that could be said about like automating current carbon trading just in terms of financial markets. It's not Adam Newman's thing. Like he set up a company. He didn't create a blockchain carbon trading thing. He's just the newest thing. But it's sort of a way of painting that this entire movement, which is really ultimately about energy cybernetics and just discounting it wholesale. It's like a poison pill. We don't even need to think about that because that's dumb.
Yeah, but they won't write about in this article how the World Bank's already launched a blockchain-based platform for tracking all the carbon credits from all the different standards agencies in the world.
Yeah.
It's outright tokenizing all of it.
Exactly.
So
that's sort of what I'm trying, like when you see someone uplifted in this media, there's a reason. And then on this slide I also have the LinkedIn from Alon Stern, who is he's the co-founder of Flow Carbon, and he is the chief investment officer for Adam Newman's family foundation, like private investment office called 166 Second. But before that, he was a portfolio manager with Soros Fund Management, and he was there full time for 9 years, starting in September of 2008, which is like the aftermath of the crash and where all of the impact economy really started building up ahead of steam, like during that time. So to me, the fact that the head of Flow Carbon and the private office for Adam Newman, so he got this not quite as big of a golden parachute as was promoted, but he got a chunk of money when he stepped away from WeWork. And then I think he was using that money to probably as seed funding for a lot of different blockchain type enterprises to uphold this next program. So the next one is one of your slides, Leo. It's talking about, for me, what's interesting, and it's hard because it's almost like learning a new language, like who are the players in this blockchain tokenization space, and then seeing how they interact.
Right.
But Cello is right there with Flow Carbon. Yeah.
Exactly. Like we were talking about before, you'll see these Medium poster things, and some things just seem like a joke or not anything, but then that might also just be backed by like MIT and the most hardcore like digital engineers around, or cryptographers, and you just like never really know. This image is from the Crypto Climate Collective that was launched by Cello, and that Flow Carbon is like one of the main members now, and there are all these different projects working on different aspects of tokenizing natural assets, basically. Whether carbon credits obviously is the biggest one right now, but like with Collectivo and others, they're doing, trying to do everything they can, basically.
Yeah. Well, and I can imagine, like later on, we're going to talk a little bit about like, it's mobilizing human behavior. And some of that is like the future of work, right? Well, so maybe if you've got, some island and you're going to put everyone to work to go out into the forest with some sort of equipment or sensors or sampling and go sample all the, biodiversity, right? And then you'll earn some tokens that then you can use. Because part of what Cello was about as well was like, this is something that was really interesting to me, was finding out about, Bernard Lietaer, like who created the euro, but he was a big fan of community currency. Like he actually, what he was talking about, he wanted an ecology of currencies. He wanted a lot of different ones. So because once you understand that the currency, once it's tagged and within this network system, you can assess patterns, right? To make risk predictions and to make forecasting and all that. So they wanted different kinds of currencies, like all of this push for like having your own sovereign currency. Fine, like Bernard Lietaer has been up for that for the last 20 years. That's fine. Like now it's, many flowers bloom. They're all coming out. But that was, I think, a key thing behind Cello. They were like, oh, well, what if somebody just turns off the money, like during lockdowns? Oh, well, if you have your own, currency systems, then you can keep exchanging within your own community. And so I kind of think I heard that same pitch with Collectivo. One of the things like, oh, so what happens if they shut down the money? Well, then you'll have your other money, you have your other local money, and it's, you'll have control of that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd say that's a big push with like all of crypto and all these tokens, is that, if they shut off the money, you'll have your own medium of exchange, and you'll be able to do that. And then specifically with the community currencies stuff and the kind of tokenization of local land and ecology and the like produce from that land, is that, you'll be able to transact with each other in your own system and not have to even if it's not about like, oh, they turned off the money. It's just, you don't need to use US dollars or whatever national currency in the first place. You can just, keep it in your own circular local economy. And then, yeah.
But it's interesting what you said about tokenizing the land too, because this is what's been sort of dawning on me as I've spent more time thinking about it, is that like it is all of these relations between yourself and the environment. So when I was first looking into blockchain, they would frame, oh, well, we're going to blockchain land records because, in those other countries that don't have good rule of law, like people lose their titles or whatever, and then they get their money and at the time I was thinking, well, okay, but essentially what that's going to mean is that there's a certain way of land ownership that will be global and imposed, right? So an idea of, I mean, I'm sure that they could come up with some sort of collective DAO, model, but like ultimately everything goes on a block for a certain kind of ownership that is standardized around the entire world. And because it would have to be to have this happen, but then they actually need it to be tokenized, because how are they going to get the carbon credit? How are they going to get the biodiversity credit? How are they going to like match your driving patterns or your reduced driving to some plot of land and the impact on that? Like everything actually has to be tokenized for any of this to actually go at scale.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that. And that's the point I tried to make in the most recent article, is that the base of all this stuff, you have to create the squares or hexagons of land that are the defined units everywhere throughout the world in order to do everything that comes from that, to define all the ecosystem services, to the economic output, the human relationships. And it's not just about, like you said, yes, with digitizing land ownership, you have to have some essentially globalized standard that everything adheres to in order for that to work. And that's definitely true. And then on top of that, it's creating the framework for tagging all the data and having those tags move together and monetizing those tags, as well as, directing people based off of those tags and like what they measurement. So it's all about, making people and respond to the signals that they get from their mathematical modeling.
Wow. Well, and I guess too, the units of land would be like, because you would need to assign it a unique identifier, right? Like it would need to be an agent. So an agent could be a person, an agent could be an elephant. But if you're going to make a cornfield or, you know, a forest, like you need a unit and it needs to have a number. So if you don't have the number, you can't plug it in anywhere. And so I'd never really thought about it like that. In order for the land separate from any of the items that live on the land, but for that geography to be a unit, it has to be broken up.
Yeah, and they're like NFTs are like the structure that seems to be used the most for doing that, creating a non-fungible token for each parcel of land.
But it's so interesting, just the story, because I think even Vermont was looking at like a prototype land titling. I don't know if it actually advanced. But like,
I'm not sure. I saw that for real estate.
That's what I'm saying. It's sort of like when they talk about digital, like tokenized blockchain voting, they talk about it like, oh, we're just going to do it like we used to do it, only now we're going to put it on blockchain. And like that's patently not where the direction it's going. They never say, oh, well, we're going to start off making it like it used to be, but eventually we're going to have radical participation and your AI agent will vote for you. Like they never say that, oh, and this is where it fits into where we're going. And the same with the real estate. Like they're like, oh, well, won't it be convenient to have all the titling things like all automated and everything? But then they don't say, oh, but by the way, we actually have to get every parcel of land blockchain, but we're going to start with this. So we'll normalize it for you. And you'll think, oh, that's totally normal, as opposed to, I don't get what you're about here.
Right, definitely. They're selling it as, oh, just, you know,
no big deal.
You won't have to deal. Yeah, you don't have to deal with the normal paperwork for ownership, and then you'll just be able to search it quickly. Everyone will be able to do their jobs faster, and that's it. But it's like, no, this whole new system of controlling people and governance and financialization. It's a different type of financialization, but that's huge part of it.
Yeah. So this is one of your slides. It's about like cotton, and I see the sustained cert is in there too, and that was part of your most recent article, a little bit about like, again, the standardizing process for all of this. So, so some people might be like, well, I don't see what a cotton field has anything to do with the smart apartment or whatever. But I'm like, I think it's definitely good, because a lot of it is about the consumables of the people, like how the environments are set up, like the commodities that go into like the construction of smart spaces and then the management of them.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start from like the top. Because I think this ecosystem services market consortium is important to talk about. Okay. And it's funded by an organization created in the 2014 Ag Bill, but it's like a consortium of some of the largest both like agricultural and chemical companies like Bayer, Monsanto, who bought Monsanto, Nestle, and like all these other, you know, just like boogeyman names pretty much involved in this.
Because you don't necessarily think of like, I mean, you do, but like agriculture isn't like the first thing doesn't come up of like petrochemical companies or, you know, like, but
it doesn't.
It's so industrial.
People,
we're not
it should,
thinking.
Yeah, it should. It totally is. Yeah, it's practically the same industry in a lot of ways, but so the ESMC is all about creating market structures for ecosystem services. So the most common being carbon credits, but also soil erosion, like organic matter in the soil, water quality, all these other things, and creating a system where farms can claim these credits based on their like agricultural practices, changing their practices and doing like regenerative grazing techniques and other things, which, you know, a lot of them can do like are better than what they have been doing, but it's about making so those practices can be commodified or traded on a market. And then the way that those credits are made for that change in practice is through all the data acquisition, the cybernetic stuff we're talking about, which, you know, is generally satellite imagery, but also it can, you know, just people coming in with tablets and writing numbers down about how many cattle are out there doing certain things. And it can be pretty manual, but also with IoT devices and other things.
They're probably imagining drones, like a lot of like aerial drone footage or something eventually. Or
I'm sure for the bigger fields. And SustainCert is a company basically created by the Gold Standard Foundation. And the Gold Standard Foundation is one of the main carbon credit standard agencies in the world. It's like them and Vera are the two largest, I believe. And SustainCert is basically a spin-off company from Gold Standard that's all about being a technical service provider for like actually validating carbon credits and like issuing like kind of the in-between between the farmer and like the Gold Standard agency.
And I was just going to say, like, I think you can see the setup over the last decade about the carbon stuff being like not really green or greenwashing, right? Or this idea that like, oh, these big companies actually, they've been saying they're doing benefits for the environment, but they're not actually. So now we need to clamp down and have more transparency, right? More data to feed it.
Yeah, exactly. More data is just like, oh, we need better standards. These corporates have been taking advantage of carbon credit market stuff and just selling the credits and commodifying it or whatever. But like now that we'll have the more end-to-end digital verifications and these intense standards, then we're like moving in the right direction. But it's really bringing in this paradigm where there's metrics taken about all aspects of like the environmental life, and then feeding that information both into these larger simulations that like produce the metrics. It's sort of like cycles that way, but then also just the kind of like obvious commodification of things that people wouldn't really think of as possible to even commodify.
Well, it's interesting because like what you said was they have to be like turned into like this idea of activity in this certain square of space, like what happens there has to be formalized in order for the financial market in that's been created to function, right? That there has to be a preliminary. And, you know, for me, like, because I'm looking at from the people side, this idea of like, well, I don't see how you can make money on poor people, like, or I don't see how you can make money on good environmental behavior. And it's like, well, it's actually, the secondary market. Like you actually, it's a gambling, like the more I realize, like this is a straight up gambling program, but you can't actually gamble on a game that hasn't started. And so like part of this is setting up the game board for the game that is to come, and then packaging like debt finance or like various financial products around the behaviors is what like becomes then the prediction markets and, you know, how the markets will operate. And that's where the money will be made. You know, and I don't even know how they make the money per se, but like there's some money trading hands over like if numbers go up or down or what how you're betting. But this equivalency on like how could you make money on like homeless veterans or, you know, refugee toddlers or cotton field, you know, farm treatments. It's because it's the secondary market, and most normal people aren't familiar with like reinsurance, right? Or derivatives markets. It just like when we think about, oh, well, we want to have a 401k or something that invests in companies so that we can retire. We think of it as an investment in a certain more tangible product, not just in a risk analytic game board.
Right. And I'd say like kind of at the beginning of all that, and from the human side and on the ecosystem service side, is the like cost offset idea. Obviously, like that's where the first justification for the money that creates those like gambling opportunities and securitization and stuff is that, oh, if this was business as usual, this cotton field or these houseless people are going to cost the city $10 million or cause $1 million in soil erosion.
Right.
And then they changed their practice. So we saved $1 million. So that's like, here's $1 million from the government or they're trying to make it a market scheme. So it's not just coming from the government, it's coming from some either conservation group or corporate that wants to like buy offsets to become carbon negative. And then also like the money being made from the gambling and the securitization and all those like secondary financial aspects, but also like, I guess you did say this too, but directly from the data and how that data has value for those larger scale simulations and
it's interconnected data. I think that's the key for the distributed ledger technology, that it's data in context. And so I feel like we're shifting from, and again, this whole story about data privacy and companies profiting from your data when you should be profiting from your data. And yeah, but like what they actually need is an integrated point to hang all of this data off of, and then where this data point intersects with this other item's data point, and like to see the building the larger patterns for, and I think that's both for the singularity and the risk, the risk analytic profiling. So they do need the unique identifiers onto everything to have data that isn't just standalone, but that is structured, right? Structured and organized in ways that really, like, that's value added data for them.
Yeah, there's a project called Streamer that made like data unions a few years back. I'm not sure like what happened exactly now, but basically there's like a Chrome extension that you can have, and then your data is fed into like a data union where all these other people are putting in their like browsing history data, and then selling that data together is a lot, like, is actually can get, people are willing to buy aggregated data from 1,000 people browsing the internet, but not, one person. So like you're saying, like they have to aggregate that. And that's the same with all this stuff too, I'm sure. And I'm sure a lot of it is like kind of, it's forming. It's not clear exactly like.
So partnerships for climate smart commodities.
Yeah. So this is like, so the USDA is investing, let's see what's there. Yeah, $3.1 billion into this project for all these different, probably I saw over like 150 projects for climate smart commodities. And these are all things like, pretty much all of them relate to things that we're talking about, but a lot of, ecosystem service stuff, carbon crediting, a lot of, I saw actually like branding seemed to be a really big thing, like coming up with the new labels and new brands for presenting this type of paradigm. And there's like, I want to look more into it, but it does seem like there's movement towards new things, like just how like the organic label was such like a big deal for stuff in the grocery store, like creating different types of
like a tag,
and
right? Yeah, it would be like a metadata tag. Yeah,
exactly. Like this is carbon neutral, ecologically grown tag. And like there seem to be kind of different.
It's like when I try to get eggs at the grocery store and they're like free range, soy free, happy chicken. Like there's like sometimes I'm just standing in front going like, well, actually now I get them from the community supported agriculture thing, but I'm just like, and they all have different, like there might be some that are like happy chickens, free range, but they're not organic, or you're weighing all the like, there's too many choices here. That's funny. Okay, yeah, I can see that. And it's interesting too because it's forest, so it's lumber in with USDA, because I think what I'm sensing, it's quite interesting, is like when I was looking at the Sidewalk Labs proposal for Toronto, I don't know, it's like Quayside or whatever. Like I think that went down the tubes because people were worried about data. And so eventually they'll have the data thing all sewn up so you can profit from being part of one of these communities, and that'll be the new phase. But they were promoting like timber construction. And it's funny because a lot of the architectural renderings were these fantastical, like, multi-level timber apartment buildings, and like later people were like, you couldn't actually build it. Like the artist drew some sort of fantastic, it looked like for a video game, but you couldn't actually build it. But I'm thinking, and it didn't really make sense like why we would create timber per se, but I can imagine that if you create markets in sustainable timber, like somebody's going to game that system to like use the sustainability in the building materials. And like as we're building out like, and I'm going to talk about it, like, I think with Lynn, opportunity zones, there's going to be this pressure to like come back in and rebuild sort of multi-use dense housing in red line districts that people have left to rot. The banks have left to rot for 60 years, and they're going to come in with like new dense developments that are going to have like every single like check the box. It won't be the food stuff per se, but I'm just thinking about like timber, building supplies, smart appliances, all of that will be coming in. But yeah, the food again, the metabolism, the agriculture, like it's at the energy, it's starting at the.
Yeah, and the same thing with timber. I'd say it's pretty much the same, all the same principles for all the stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah, but like, it's funny because you see things like that doesn't make sense. Like, why would they build 8-story buildings out of, and it was obviously timber, like it just looked like a fantasy land. And I'm like, but ultimately, like these things happen because they want to imprint a certain idea and that there is a market force behind it somewhere. So I can see that where that might be. So I added in a couple of these, a couple slides from this report called Housing Diversity Corporation. And I opened this up a few days ago, and it's based in Seattle. So this is all about wellness in your living environment tied to the Sustainable Development Goals. And some of it has to do with like what I was just saying, building resilient infrastructure and making them safe. And this is based in Seattle. And I'm going to be talking about this a little bit more with Cliff, but Cliff actually worked in a lot of construction for some of these buildings, and he's like, Allison, they're tiny, but like the pitch is that they'll put it opposite the hospital, opposite the university campus, and it's these, he's like, these studio apartments are like 200 square feet, like apartments, but the payoff is that you can just walk out your door and go to work, or and so there is, and that's framed as sustainability because the metrics buried in this report are all about like reduced car use and then other kinds of wellness activities. But like I can see how the commodity piece will fit into this diversity, and then they're going to probably layer the tax credits, like a LEED certification will probably get you a certain payback. Workforce housing will probably get you a certain payback. And they'll just layer on the things, so like eventually it'll almost be like somebody's paying them to build the building. But SDG 12 is ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns. And so this is about construction materials per se, but a lot of this report was really about managing people in the multifamily housing. And so later I could imagine like, I don't know, like some charter school in the mixed development housing, but all the children wearing cotton uniforms from fields that have a sustained cert golden seal or something like that. So like, and like these are disadvantaged youth. So there's some like token that will be applied to that, like because they chose the right cotton from the right kind of land. And again, I'm not against things in theory, but I just don't trust these giant multinational mega corporation finance things to be doing it for the right reason. And then later on, so IRIS, these are the metrics that are connected to the B Corp labs, and the Rockefeller Foundation funded the IRIS metrics. And this Urban Land Institute that I wasn't familiar with, but it turns out that the head of Trammell Crow, which is the big Dallas real estate investment, head of their residential housing for 30 years, who just retired, I don't know, like 10 years ago. But they were like the largest creator of multifamily housing in the country for many years. And his name was Mr. Terwilliger, and he went to the Naval Academy and then worked on nuclear submarines. It was crazy, right? And then he just happened to go into a multifamily housing and then like be a major player in Habitat for Humanity International and gave them a $100 million grant. So, but Mr. Terwilliger was very involved in this Urban Land Institute, like, and so it's like managing real estate. So I thought those things were kind of interesting.
It's interesting.
Of course, the nuclear submarine had to fit in there somewhere.
Yeah, that's always back to
and he was like the largest donor to the Naval Academy's foundation. Go figure. I know, so strange. So yes, Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. Gosh, you get to read all the really fun stuff, Leo. It's like, bless you for wading into that.
My brain's gone kind of mush, but this one, I mean, so yeah, Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures is I mean, as I was going to say, it is what it sounds like. That's not very helpful. It's lazy. But so basically, it's like a collection of these, some of the largest multinational institutions. I think they claimed under like their members have over $20 trillion in assets or something. And then this list on the right here is just from the like financial services section of the members list.
AXA Group, Bank of America, BlackRock, BNP Paribas. I know a lot of those names.
Yeah, HSBC, US,
oh,
UBS
Macquarie.
is on the
Macquarie
bottom
is in Philly. Yeah.
Swiss Re,
Wow.
some really big ones. And so it's basically like they haven't. I think their final thing is supposed to be released in the next like 3 or 4 months, but it's pretty much the simulation that we're talking about. It's the like globalized risk management and like standards framework for ecological, environmental, like nature related, decisions, anything from creating insurance models to like pricing impact from building new roads or buildings and these sorts of things. It's kind of an all-encompassing framework for measuring and having globalized standards for that.
And so like, I feel like this is so important for people to understand, again, like not that we're trying to make it one kind of ism, but like the idea that somehow it's the China or the East taking over like the program. It's like, it's misunderstanding the nature of the transformation that's happening, which is this data economy that's being driven by finance using technologies that are largely military technologies, and it's global. So I'm sure that probably China has something similar, that there are other, but it's not one or the other. Like, and so
they'll show up in all these sorts of groups too, different Chinese companies, and China does a lot of stuff on their own too.
So it's a transformation. It's a it's a cybernetic data transformation, and so that's going to affect the entire world, right? Because it's all going to be entered into the gaming infrastructure.
And then it's like my focus has a lot been on like the insurance aspect of this, like risk. That's where all these insurance companies are getting involved, because when you're financializing nature, or really just quantifying nature, and the financial aspect is the impact on the metrics, like the impact on the data becomes the finance. Right. So risk in that paradigm is like risk to the data, like risk to the metrics, like the risk that the satellites
it's so abstracted.
Show that this,
it's like removed. It's just like a mirror, like you're mirroring it into the
they're mirroring it, and then the risk or loss or profit comes from how the mirror changes over time, or how the mirror changes, and
that's the planetary computer, right? Like that's so like Microsoft's planetary computer. I mean, I'm sure there's probably more than one, but like in concept, while they might say, oh, we need the planetary computer to save the Earth for sustainability, actually they need the planetary computer to run the financial markets in some ways.
To create the basis for the financial markets, and then to run them also. And so the insurance companies have gotten really involved in kind of figuring that out, and figuring out how they price it, the types of contracts they do for the change of data. And then like one of the main ways that I've seen that happen is through, maybe not main's the right way, but like a big one right now is popular right now, parametric insurance, which is a system of insurance where basically if a specific, so it's mostly been used in like catastrophe scenarios. So a country will take out parametric insurance contract in order to insure against a natural disaster. I think the largest one in the world right now is the state of California has like multi-billion-dollar parametric insurance contract for
earthquakes.
For earthquakes. And so if there's an earthquake that's above a certain level Richter scale, or on what am I looking? Strata, like, they get paid out if it's a certain amount here and then more if it's higher, and then so on and so forth. So they make different levels to it usually. But the basic idea being, if a natural disaster hits a certain data threshold, then there's an automatic insurance payout, like no questions asked, to the, usually country at this point, but also different businesses and stuff. And this has been like, I was looking into more recently, the concept has been around since the 1800s, and there's been parametric insurance for a long time, but this sort of, the catastrophe model didn't really happen until, was surprise, surprise, developed in Boston by this person called Karen Clark, who made a prediction for the damage of Hurricane Andrew using like these probabilistic statistical models that like had never really been used in insurance for hurricanes up until this point. And like she came up with a number that everyone thought was crazy, and then it turned out she was right for that hurricane. So that's sort of like, that's the story of how
that's the story.
the catastrophe modeling industry was created. The Boston connections were interesting too. But yeah, the company that she made, Air Worldwide, is the third-party modeler for over 70% of like the parametric insurance contracts in the world.
Wow,
which is interesting. And they're owned now by V-Risk, a New Jersey-based like insurance information technology.
Well, it's what's interesting too is that like what I realized is that like northern New Jersey and Connecticut are both the centers for insurance and the centers for the hedge funds. Yeah. I mean, besides like New York City per se, but like those two, like I never really thought about like what, and I mean, I'm in the Mid-Atlantic. I don't really think about too much about different kinds of states, up in New England, but I'm like, oh no, Connecticut is insurance in northern New Jersey, but it makes sense that you would have the hedge funds and the insurers in the same place.
Definitely. Oh yeah. And I think like, it's important. So like a big part of the parametric insurance contracts is that there's always the third party modeler, like this outside group that creates the mathematical and statistical models on like how likely an event is to happen, and then what the payout should be based on that, based on like the local economy and all these other things. And that's kind of like what this is. The risk management framework is just like a larger standardization of doing that, of figuring out these, statistical models on what will happen if certain things happen.
Well, it's interesting because in the pay for success finance realm, there's like, it's slightly different because this is assessing it in advance or setting the metric. But there's an impact verification piece, right, too, like because that's what opens the payment if it hits a certain, but the impact verification is a third-party system, and of the four primary early pay for success pilots in Santa Clara County, the housing one and the mental health one were both Palantir. And so I'm just thinking, like, is the transition of Palantir away, like, which is Peter Thiel, does that become some sort of automated system, right? Like the all-seeing eye, like does Palantir I'm not saying there wouldn't be any people attached to it, but is the move, I think in both of these respects, towards increased automation, like increased ubiquitous sensor technology, and that there's no people involved, which because of how crappy the insurance industry is, like many people, at least on a personal basis, have issues with not getting responsive service or getting the money that they're entitled to. Like people will just be with open arms, yes, give me automation, that's what I want. But essentially that means the world being run, as this cybernetic system.
Totally.
So monetizing ecological assets.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to put this paragraph in because I thought it was a pretty succinct and detailed explanation of what is happening and what's going to happen for a lot of these ecosystem services and creating the geo NFT, the tokenized land registries and all this sort of thing.
Can you see it well enough to read it?
Yeah.
Okay, so I would say why don't you read it, or at least read a chunk of it,
great. And
then I would just put out for people. So Collectivo, they're working in Curacao now. Is that?
Yeah, Curacao is the where it was all developed and where they're gonna launch, but it's gonna
be bigger.
expand to
Well, they pick
wherever
an
they can
island,
and
right?
spend-
They'll pick like a small manageable place and then like get the pilot up. But I would say, like, in listening to it, imagine the ecology, like an ecological system isn't just like a tropical island rainforest village, but it could be like a Washington DC multi-use mixed housing development. Like, because ultimately it's all about agents. Like, the agents could be a tree and a bug and an ant and some water. Like, those are all agents. But then in the flow, and just to sort of loop it back with like the Andreessen Horowitz, Adam Newman flow concept, is like you could have different kinds of agents that would be like the swimming pool and the children and the charter school and the whatever, like the laundromat, like there would all, like those would all be agents. But it's a similar, like, what's really important is that the work that you're doing in terms of parsing apart the infrastructure, the data infrastructure, once they have it dialed in, they can use it in a lot of different settings.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point. Oh. Okay, so monetizing ecological assets. At the heart of Collectivo's approach to ecological assets is the Geospatial Non-Fungible Token, GeoNFT, which aims to be a faithful digital twin of the underlying physical reality. It is a non-fungible token consisting of topological data such as geometric collections of areas, line strings, or points, includes a centralized or decentralized identifier pointing to a data store of the ecological state data for its constituent territory. So I'll just interject there. The ecological state data is the data that like determines what ecosystem services have been like generated by that area, whether that's the carbon credits or soil or anything else. And then
and can I just say one thing? Yeah. Later on, I'm going to be talking about like there's an interest in workforce housing. So like for teachers and police officers and things like that. So I could see totally like the ecosystem services contribution to community being in the human capital side, being like this apartment complex is housing 30 teachers, which are a community asset that provide this value to like the community at large. So I can see that there's interesting connections. Faithful digital twin.
Yeah. Right. There you go. And there were also Curve Labs, which we've talked about in the past, is like the one of the main engineering groups building Collectivo. So that's relevant. Geo-NFT borders can be computationally defined. Example, the boundary of an area of a certain level of forestation are manually determined through the local governance of a geographic expert. Following from the Geo-NFT are ecological tokens. Fungible ERC20 tokens split from the Geo-NFT through a process known as fractionalization, the dividing of an NFT into multiple fractions or shards. As previously discussed, these ecological tokens can be both collateral and local reserves, such as the Collectivo Curaçao Reserve for community currency production, or global reserves such as the Cello Reserve for the Cello stablecoin production, or treasury assets, materially backing the wealth of the Collectivo network and KTT to seed new community economies all around the world. So just to go over that.
Put it down in plain English.
Yeah. Like the idea of fractionalizing these geo-NFTs or like land registries basically is mostly about making them investable, that other people from the outside could put in, like invest in those fractions in order to have access to the like revenue from the data itself and from the like carbon credits or other ecosystem services generated by that land. And then also so it can be used basically as like debt instrument, but as collateral in different reserve systems. And they talk about a few options. And like that's Cello's big thing is using tokenized natural assets as collateral for currency. So they talk about here about using it as collateral for community currency. Like
there was a talk yesterday. I don't know if you got a chance to so like one of the ETH Denver talks, I think it was maybe the first day because I was looking at their videos and there was only 1 day's worth of like the new talks, but it was specifically doing natural assets in Brazil. I don't know that it was on.
Yeah, I did
no,
see
it was
it.
Cello. Yeah. So
Yeah, it was Cello.
And of course, Brazil is really at the forefront of a lot of this. I feel like the density, like there's a lot of population density, especially of people in poverty and natural resources. So like it's easier than India. India is like too big for them to start with. So like Brazil is an interesting target. But I was just thinking about when you're saying like the access to the revenue flow off the data, which I hadn't really thought about it like that. But once you think about like Ocean Protocol, right? Like Trent McConney, what he's saying is that you can generate profit off of your data sets. Like you store the data sets in Ocean Protocol, and then people who want to do machine learning or do big modeling and have access, there will be payments associated with accessing. Now they will hold all the data, so your data isn't going out into the general environment, and you're supposed to feel wonderful, that it's secure and safe, but it sits there and they can do computation on it in the protocol, and then there will be a payment flow. So that's kind of fascinating if you think about it, because you can imagine people investing in, like, that you would want to go after the rainforest first because they would generate the most data, I think. I mean, the different diversity of data. Like you could get data in like the tundra, but there's going to be a limited, like the biodiversity is probably limited. So you're not going to get as much data, which is not to say that the ecosystem of the tundra is less important than a rainforest, but it's not going to generate the same amount of data. That's fascinating.
And like yeah, exactly. And then like, I think I'll read this last part because I think it'll tie that together a little bit on like the multifaceted nature of this. But so beyond their role as collateral treasury assets, there are four means of monetizing and binding ecological assets to our underlying material reality as data tokens, output rights tokens, insurance tokens, and ownership tokens. So that's like what I was saying about as data tokens is what we had said, like investing into the rights of the data flow, and whether you want like that data for yourself or whether it'll be sort of automatically monetized through something like Ocean Protocol. The output rights tokens would be like rights to the carbon credits generated or the other ecosystem services.
Right. So if you need that for your company, you need to offset something. Yeah, you would
exactly.
Even if you didn't create it, you could acquire it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you could invest through the ERC20 token, and then have like ownership of part of those ecosystem services, like output rights, and then also insurance tokens. So that's like where the parametric insurance comes in. Is that then I need to like figure out exactly how this is working more, but basically, so like, okay, so these have been commodified or made into a revenue stream from both the data, the like actual ownership of the property, and the rights to the revenue from ecosystem services. And since that exists and has a financial value, there's always going to be insurance, like looking for that. And of course, like the agricultural production. So a lot of these things are food forests. So that's also like, a main part.
I mean, who would even think of a food forest as a thing? Like that seems like a term that they came up with so that they could use this model somewhat. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I like the idea of it generally, but like, yeah.
But
I mean, I'm not against it as an idea, but like, I don't know that I would like food for like. I mean,
yeah.
Like no, it's just the place you live. It's just you get food. Like, I don't know. Okay.
Totally, but basically making like Web3 parametric insurance contracts that the owners would engage in, and then other people that like want to take essentially the other side of that bet. Then the way they do that's a little complicated, but it would be like locking up the ownership token into a pool, and then you would have like another group earning. Yeah, actually, I don't know.
The insurance stuff is hard to wrap your mind
but yeah,
around.
the insurance stuff, parametric insurance. I'll figure that out.
Bless you for trying to figure it out for us, Leo. I really appreciate it. But it's important because it's so much money, right? It's so much money locked up in the insurance and reinsurance money. Like, it's all very powerful.
Totally. And I'd say in general, like bringing like microinsurance or insurance to smallholding farmers has been like a big thing that these companies have been going for a long time, which is like finally happening primarily through technology. Because for a long time there was like, we can't really make it work. It's too expensive having like manual underwriters, people going in there and like trying to figure out like what happened and to like do the insurance contracts. But with Parametric and like just like automated insurance claims, they're doing a lot more, like bringing a lot more assurance to the small agricultural producers, which make up, a very large percentage of the world's food production is from like less than 10 acres of, people. I forget the number. I think it's like 30% or something. Like
Wow.
Quite large. And specifically with like doing blockchain versions of this, there's a consortium called the Lemonade Crypto Climate Collective, I believe, which includes like Hanover Reinsurance, this insurance tech company called Pula, Avalanche is the blockchain chain link and stuff, and they're doing basically what we're talking about here, making parametric insurance contracts for specifically around rainfall and crop insurance. So ensuring if there's too little rain or too much rain, based on like what local weather stations say, that farmers getting automatic payouts.
Which is crazy because then you also have geoengineering, right? Like it's well known that there is the technology to do managed, so you have insurance companies and yet we're supposed to pretend like we don't know that there's cloud seeding operations and like it's just
and that they don't know that. And,
I mean, it's like so ridiculous.
Yeah, and then that's being like, because it's all digital too, that's essentially, starting a digital identity for all these small farmers.
Right, because they've got their phone, right? And then you can hook them into Cello and these other things, And
Cello's whole, like, one of their big things is being like a mobile-based blockchain, like primarily being for mobile applications and for even like flip phones. Like you don't even need a smartphone.
You just need a phone number, right?
Yeah, just a phone number, and then like it's connected with like the M-Pesa system is the big one in Kenya, where it's basically like the telecom company does like online banking for you, but you interact with it through just like texting a code, and then you're like, it's like type 1 to
well, I would just say at one point in the last couple of weeks, I had my blog doesn't have huge reach, but I had like a couple hundred visits in one day from Kenya. So I was like, I don't know, like, how, but I would say if you're listening to this and you're from that part of the world, like definitely go to siliconicarus.org, right? And look up Leo's work on Cello, because it's really central to understanding like what's coming. So somebody out there figured out something about what's going on. That's
interesting. Yeah. Or it's just them from us.
Yeah, that's all right. It could just be like Will Ruddick or whatever,
Yeah. They're all Kenya.
Well, see, like when I'm looking at like again, like this is piece like the data tokens and the ownership tokens. Like later on, one of the key pieces of Newman's talk with Andreessen is like, okay, so this is our product. Like we're creating a future. We're anticipating a future where people don't own property anymore. You're just a lifelong renter. But then we're going to offer you some sort of equity in the system. Like we're going to create that you will have a share in the value created. And they don't outright say that the value is data, but I think it's very clear that the value will be some sort of data stream. And so imagining like one of these developments or Hollands or, whatever, a geolocation, a geospatial non-fungible token that represents a certain neighborhood unit. And then like within that, offering people some share in terms of the value that's created in the data stream of those environments. Like I can imagine that maybe that's what is actually going to be going on with the equity that he's offering. Somehow it's going to be some sort of fraction of the data flow.
Yeah. Where I think you've talked about this too, that's sort of where UBI, this concept of UBI is really, I think, transforming into is like being these revenue flows from the data that people produce from interacting with the smart environment. And this is one project also built on Cello called Impact Market, which is doing, crypto UBI, and they have a few other different things called like learn to earn. So like trying to do, so I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. We'll look at the video in a minute, but it's like clicking through these like
stupid
weird
modules,
stupid,
learning modules.
Yeah, learning modules with these like dumb questions, and then giving people money for it. But they work with a lot of NGOs and different groups and stuff to implement this around the world and to track, like, because they're kind of sneaky. Like they don't exactly, like I had to dig a little bit. Like they don't do white papers or any of that. Like they definitely are on the side of like putting out less information, but they've, this has actually been used, I think from their numbers, like over 30 or 40,000 people in the world. So it's like, it's not nothing. They're out there and have done it, but.
Now, and it says like giving rate per backer. So I'm assuming, I'm trying to remember when I was looking up the effective altruism group, like they were pushing, like there was some certain platform about like directed giving. Like, again, this is all about impact and scientific charity. And so like, it seems like where things are moving with the UBI is that like, it's going to be some rich people who are putting in the money to get access to the data stream or like ownership rights to some sort of fractional reserve, not the government. So again, this is the challenge with people who are resisting, but are making the story that they're occupying is that the government that's trying to do all these things to you. And I'm like, no, actually they kind of want to disentangle you from units and make you an agent in the game, and then allow these automated investments, which are technically at this point, some of them may be coming from high net worth individuals, but a lot of them are coming probably out of portfolios, right? Investment portfolios that like are not really even human at all at this point. And so there's a narrative being set up around, like, again, I think like this sort of libertarian, entrepreneurial, I'm sure they frame this family as like entrepreneurs or like data entrepreneurs or something, right? And because that's the story they want. And then it's going to be enmeshed with sort of like, I think this sort of Protestant ethic of like, work hard and make money, and it's a lot of it's going to be meshed in with these humanitarian aid systems. And again, I'll just put a shout out for like Raul wrote a really good piece about sort of the historical background of Nigeria and like the Civil War and how it was managed in the name of like decolonizing, but not really, and just putting them into a game that allowed global infrastructure of these NGO humanitarian systems to like lay the groundwork for 50 or 60 years for what's coming up now, which is the next phase. And so that understanding that historic trajectory in terms of how like the global south has really been used as a test bed for these technologies, but they're not going to stay there. Like they're, if you think that they're just staying in, Kenya or whatever, no. They're coming to rural Texas soon, like it's because it's a cloud world. Once they have it locked in there, like the imperative of the model is that it keeps growing. So like, that's what I'm trying to say. Like we have to come to a reckoning with, but get our headspace in, like be willing to at least disentangle from the story, some of the stories and the frameworks that you're being given. Because like if you stay in some of the frameworks that are being offered to you, like the government is the problem, you need to bootstrap your way, you need to be independent, but it's all coming with this high net worth blockchain backing, it's going to be limiting. You're not actually going to be able to understand or take good action, like with what's coming. Anyway, definitely. Lecture.
And all this stuff is, it's like, it's funded by, anyone can donate, but a lot of these are crypto whales, like people who want to put their crypto to like, fund impoverished people to eat or to like start their own little business. I'd say it's like a lot of the narratives are similar to like the whole microcredit fad that was around for a long time. It's like, if you give someone $50 and they can buy a few sheep, then they can, build all these businesses from that. And then a big part of like what they do too, which they don't really talk about, is identity management. Because like in order to do the UBI, they create these like hierarchical systems where the DAO that runs this like authenticates like a community manager who has the power to like make beneficiaries to the UBI. And in order to do that, they have to do like a lot of like fraud protection, or a Sybil resistance is like the technical term for it, for like figuring out how to
you can't have multiple accounts, right?
Yeah, it can, like, yeah, how to do that. And then part of the ways they do that is like collective punishment for like making sure that people don't abuse the system. Like you all lose it if someone like does something bad. But like, and then I write a bit about the article. I think it's called DeFi for the people, Life for the machines on Silicon Icarus. Goes like more into those details and the like extent that the data collection that they do too, like a lot of surveys and like more in-depth things than just like people's financial transactions and like how they use the crypto itself. But yeah, a lot of other
well, I mean, and
there.
that's like a lot of social engineering, right? So you're because if you're non-compliant, you're threatening the well-being of all the other people in your circle. And
Right.
and when I was looking at, and I can't remember the name of the model, but Vinay Gupta and Ian Grigg of Materium / the Ethereum contract layer with Consensus, whatever. He was working with Consensus, right? And then, Grigg was the Ricardian smart contracts. Like they were chatting up, and essentially what they were talking about was sort of co-opting the like an African community like savings club model where people would go into a collective and then like inserting that with blockchain smart contracts and then creating almost like sort of these holons for trade. But essential to it was that your behaviors, you were sort of vouched for by the collective reputation score of your own community, and that's what enabled the trade, like the backing against Sybil resistance and other sort of malfeasance with the contracts, and layering in like even co-opting like elders councils into like arbitration, like new versions of like automated arbitration. It was so messed up, but yeah, you can see it all unfolding. Like once you get the view, it's like, oh.
And that's exactly what grassroots economics and Will Ruddick is, like this, I don't know how to pronounce it, the Serafu, like that's what they called their blockchain community currency system. And that's exactly what it's.
Oh, I haven't made that
Serafu is the
connection.
term for those like credit circles, those traditional credit circles. And I think.
Okay. Well, so this is a little video that I captured off a tweet that you shared, Leo. The tweet was from February of 2023. So I guess just a couple weeks ago. Girls Initiative for Economic Development, educating our girls on how to learn and earn on impact market. And then there's various ats behind here, but including Cello, Uganda was one of them. And I will just say, like, before we start this, so next week, actually, I'm going to spend a few days with folks I know who are attending the United Nations Conference on the Status of Women. And again, like women and girls are UN Sustainable Development Goal 5. So all of this like gender tracking like is a key part of this. And the theme for that year is technology. So I'm going to try to help them sort of debrief what I'm not actually going to be able to like participate in the sessions because I don't have like my special credential, but I'm interested in what they're coming back with. But I think a lot of the technologies, because of the economic payout, like layering in the credits, like there's bonus credit, right? Like if you do all this stuff, but you do it for girls or women, then you get extra money on top of that. Right. So I can see that's it's not surprising that it's girls. I don't know. Do you want to say anything before we play it?
So this is still impact markets, and it's like a new like addition to their like mobile app. So how they do the UBI and stuff is this mobile application that used to be one that was funded by A16Z as well, the Laura app, which I think is on the slide later on, but they kind of made their own based off of that. And as a part of their app is this like learn to earn module where they basically just like make you ask or make you answer kind of like, I don't know, just sort of, almost kind of like insulting questions or just like, I don't know, it's odd. And then that being how they get their UBI. But I'm sure like the example here, I'm sure is like intentionally like simplified too. And they envision like a much larger thing about, like business management, or like a lot of it actually is about using like how to use DeFi applications.
Right.
So they'll like ask these questions about how to use these things to try to get people to use it, especially with that free crypto that they just gave them. But, you know, like we did, actually, did we talk? I'm not sure if we had a talk about the World Bank's like blockchain for education community of practice, but this is very much in line with all those things that are going on too.
Yeah, because they were partnered with like Learning Economy Foundation, which you know has pilots in. I don't really know what they're doing actually, but like supposedly they have one in the state of Colorado and Broward County, Florida. But you know, they have these apps and yeah, it's all phone based. And so it merges your identity, your identification, including things like passports. So like that would be your mobility, like your geolocation and your money and your credentials, like all in sort of this integrated app format.
And I'd say this is like the same exact thing, but less, you know, it's less formalized. So there's not like, oh, this is your passport. Like they kind of bypass the like traditional government formal identification things and kind of like freewheeling it.
Okay, so I'll play this. So there's no sound, so I'm just going to say something. So this is a screen. It says learn and earn. They're clicking on learn and earn, and it has levels completed, you know, 7 levels. So you start up your levels and the basics. They have a various lessons. So they're like, here, start your lesson. You know, here's jump through the hoops. And then it opens like, what is learn and earn? So you're supposed to read about it and then, you know, answer questions. This set of lessons to improve your journey, designed to be a simple and fun way of learning and discovering new topics and concepts. Probably most of which relate to crypto or blockchain, DeFi. Yeah, learn, complete quizzes, and earn rewards. And so learn about financial and crypto concepts again. So like, here, let me teach you about crypto. Put your newfound knowledge to the test. And then you do that and you earn rewards for every level you finish. Oh, terms and conditions. Here's the fine print. Quickly through the fine print. So what is learn and earn? And then, you know, do you want to learn more? And then here, go to our social media feeds. Start the quiz. Let's see. What is the name of the impact market program? And then you're supposed to say, learn and earn. And then they have like 3 choices. You have 3 choices for people who are listening. And then you pick one of the 3 and then they're like, oh yeah, that's right. So you go on to the next one. How many attempts do you have to answer correctly? 1, 2, or 3? Like again,
3.
Right. And then it says, what are the maximum points you can earn per lesson? Like, again, it's like, talk about behaviorists. This is total behaviorism, like pay you to jump through these stupid, like, and I think a lot of people who have to do these online, you've completed the lesson. Like they realize how stupid it is, but you're just forced to do it. Look, and then, you know, you have multiples of these lessons that go on. So I think that's the end of it. And someone was telling me, I posted, you know, I uploaded that to my channel and someone was like, one of the crypto companies, I don't know if it's Coinbase or something, like they used to have this.
Yeah, Coinbase has that.
Yeah, they're like, oh,
I
it
think they
seems
still
like
do.
that. Yeah.
It's the same exact thing.
So, but see, and this is the thing, like when I started in education, like we were like, online learning, again, even this personalized learning, this algorithmic, it's not human. It doesn't actually help you think. And, you know, and then we were fighting cyber charter schools, which is essentially like, and it's become so normalized, but even when we, you know, when my kids started, this was maybe when they were in 5th grade, like at that point, if you were homeschooling, most homeschooling people, like they would use a computer, but not a program curriculum, right? Like you would do your own research, but you wouldn't. So, and then eventually, because of the falling apart of the school districts, a lot of people were quote unquote schooling at home, but they were using pre-programmed cyber curriculums. So we're like fighting, like we're trying to contest the takeover of cyber charter schools because it was actually not only kids were leaving, but they were pulling resources out of the public schools to go into the cyber. But like, to me, this is sort of the pinnacle of what comes next because, you know, when I was, I don't know, I had that long response about Derek, about the digital child labor, which is like what this stuff will be, right? Like, oh, well, you want them to be begging in the street? They should be sitting at home doing crypto quizzes and earning some points or playing some games and earn some points. Like, I could see that this was coming, and in the picture that I chose, it was like a little toddler boy, like a black boy sitting on a hill in Africa somewhere with a phone. And these are quizzes that aren't meant to be like oh, you learn through a device and you're on your own independent learning journey. No, it's a program. It's literally you are being programmed, and you're not even going to have a laptop. Things like you're literally just going to be wandering around on your phone pushing buttons, and totally disconnected from nature and the environment and everything else. And this is how but it's about the data, right? And the data is about the markets. Oh, so I put this one in this because you mentioned about the microfinance, and I saw that actually that Grameen Bank, which is sort of the big, well-known entity in the microfinance space. It's based out of a guy, he was in Bangladesh, I think, and he won a Nobel Prize for his economic innovations. But that Grameen is partnered with Cello, and this was from 2021. Game changer, propelling Grameen Foundation into the world of open finance for micro entrepreneurs on Cello's blockchain, which I think you had mentioned before. And then later on, I'm going to include this in the talk with Lynn, but like I think they were addressing COVID, people who had lost their jobs to COVID, but they would say something like, oh, we're going to teach them how to make jelly. Like literally, like the program was like, workers in the Philippines who got displaced out of their work, we're going to give them grants to learn to be jelly makers. And I'm like, you're totally not looking at, like, yeah, maybe for 6 months you'll let them be jelly makers, and then you're going to have them like train, like do like data hygiene on like photographs for machine learning. You're not training cohorts of jam makers.
That was one of Cello's other projects, is training people to do that. And yeah, I think also this one in the Philippines with Grameen was also involved like business cooperatives, like making I forget, it's been a little while since I wrote it, but yeah, it was like giving people the grants to do their own little business, but then they would sell to like a local marketing cooperative. So they would like sell their goods to that co-op, which was also in part like funded through this. But I forget.
Can you totally imagine a multi-use housing development based on cooperatives, right? Like you would have like your learning pod where the children go down to do their learning. Like, and this is how it kind of links together, right? Like, oh, and then they would have, don't you think that they would probably have some raised garden or vertical farming? Like they might have like a vertical farming warehouse, and the kids could go do some farming and get some credit for like their nature stuff. Like it's all about packaging these like layers of, but the thing is, like the guy was totally corrupt, and this is an article from 2011, a run on Grameen's bank integrity as founder's career ends in disgrace. And that essentially, I guess he got his start like redirecting $100 million in aid from Norway into his bank to start it with. Like that wasn't like, he wasn't supposed to do that. That's where the original money came from. And then it says that like the bank would charge up to 30% interest rates on loans. And then like the people who were forced to do the collections, if they couldn't collect the money from the people who'd taken on the loans, that it was deducted from their salary. So it's just like a really vicious, and Grameen Bank is, I think, like even in California, like I think they have some presence in the United States. It's mostly global South, but they're also in low income communities. So yeah, so Cello's got some interesting partners there. So I'm just going to run this clip. This is a bit about, it's sort of, again, just building off of, your focus has been like on Cello and some of the more specific blockchains, but then there's the big guys, right? The big backers, many of whom were offering a lot of finance both to WeWork as a company and then personal loans and lines of credit to Adam Neumann directly. So here's this little clip.
JP Morgan leads a large investment in WeWork.
Adam loved to name drop to people, and I mean, Jamie Dimon is the world's top banker, and he would tell people he was his personal banker.
So that's an important part. Like Jamie Dimon just doesn't pour money into WeWork, for no reason, right? To be Adam Neumann's personal banker. But it wasn't just JP Morgan. It was also UBS Bank and Credit Suisse. So here's Jamie Dimon in Dallas. So I'm going to touch on this a little bit later with Lynn. But JP Morgan was backing the Dallas County Promise, which was the education training for like sort of new skills for youth investment. So they were working on this is the program the Dallas County Promise was doing blockchain identity through Greenlight in the community college system, and also for high school students that were doing early college. So you would sign up and you would get a mastery transcript with Greenlight. But this Greenlight blockchain credential system was going beyond simply your transcript of your coursework to start to include mental health data, and then also fitness, like physical fitness data. So it's got starting, and your medical status in terms of your injections or whatever, like it had all of the things. And they called it a portrait of wellness. And so you could sort of like anyway, yeah. So this is Jamie Dimon, like WeWork, but also like connected to that. I have a slide here. They were JP Morgan Chase targets more than 2.5 trillion over 10 years in climate action and sustainable development. So again, on the one hand, and I'm still trying to figure out how this works. You've got the collectivos and the Cellos and the Curve Labs, and they're honestly pretty small outfits from what I can tell. Like maybe 20 people, like 10, 20 feet, like, and yet they're kind of all over the place building it. And so I'm kind of curious, at what point do these things start to interface, right? Like the behemoths of JP Morgan, like with Curve Labs or with the Cello things, because they're not disconnected, but I can't quite like get my mind around how it's going to happen that like the 2.5 trillion in climate action is going to, like, clearly they need some IBM in there and some Hewlett Packard and some sensor networks. Like it's got to go through some other guys before they get to it. But
right. Yeah. I mean, I'd say one that is a pretty good illustration. There was the Red Cross, the catastrophe bond, which was like a parametric insurance bond that was just securitized on like private blockchain, but they were also working with like grassroots economics for implementing community currencies, like in the event of that like volcano catastrophe happening.
So it's like coming through the World Wildlife Federation or like the Nature Conservancy. Like there's a step up probably.
Yeah, there's a step up, and then like I'd say also like the USDA stuff and Sustained Cert. Yeah. So Sustained Cert's from the Gold Standard Foundation, and they're like pretty close to having just like carbon credits be on the blockchain, and like that's what they're going to do. They're like figuring out how they're going to do that, and then those carbon credits they will authorize them to be either tokenized on like other like more like Web3 platforms, like stuff like Collectivo, like the big one's called Toucan Protocol. And there was like some drama because there was some issue and some carbon credits were like double spent, and then so like Gold Standard and Vera like shut it down for a little while. They're like, okay, we need to like rethink how we're going to do this, but they're just about ready to have their new standards on how they're going to interface with like Web3 protocols and stuff. So I'd say like that's one where like this money would be kind of like this money I sort of think about similarly as the $3.1 billion of the USDA, and then through like Gold Standard and those sorts of things is how I see it coming into like the kind of smaller Web3 outfits. And then I'm sure that like different examples for different industries, but
interesting. Well, and then I was also thinking, just to link the two slides together, about the training, like the reskilling youth, and then the climate action. Like I can, because in Texas now, like IBM and the various people, like they're training children for like specific jobs, like it's STEM careers. I talked about that a little bit on my feed yesterday about the biotech, like the Philadelphia's biotech hub downtown is like partnering with all the schools around it to like train middle school kids or like whatever that looks like in synthetic biology or something like that. And so like I could see that there would be an interface between climate action and training, like especially underserved youth into climate jobs. Like they will say like, oh, here's a category of skills that we need for sustainability, whatever, in terms of, blockchain, electrical engineer, grid people or something, biotech. Totally. And then that if we can double dip, like if we can get a kid like from a disadvantaged background into that job that's going to save the climate, like we get these extra tokenized points. And then if you have again, within, I'm just keep thinking about to flow, like you've got a neighborhood complex that has some sort of magnet school that is training kids to a certain career path. You know, it's always like cradle to career is literally like a certain, because it's, you know, they don't want to train you into everything. They really have a small sliver of jobs that you're going to do if they're effective at placing people, even if not long term, but like for the first 6 months into a job, like they'll be able to claim some sort of credit on that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is just a clip that was saying so he had backing not only from JP Morgan and UBS, but also Credit Suisse. And then he had a $97 million personal line of credit from JP Morgan. So like they were in very deeply. I have a slide here that talks about Credit Suisse launching their own environmental impact fund. So I just want to sort of provide some proof like that the people who are funding and rework have their tentacles into the impact space, targeting investors who are seeking a more environmentally friendly, sustainable approach to business by supporting concepts such as the circular economy. And of course, the circular economy is the energy credit. And then speaking about like, so essentially Adam Neumann's career, like the WeWork stuff started to crumble, like the money flow tap got turned off, ostensibly because they had an initial coin offering, like an IPO, or not coin, initial IPO, whatever everything is ICO now. Like, but their IPO, like for WeWork to go public, they needed to go public because Mayoshi Son of SoftBank turned off the tap and said, "Oh, I think that's enough for now." And they were scrambling for money, so they needed to do their offer. And there's a document that goes out and, you know, that people, you know, review. And the story goes, it was so incredibly terrible that everybody was tweeting all their most favorite terrible parts of the document that went out. And then the whole thing sort of, they said, oh, they withdrew it. And they said, we can't do it now. So it was going to go public at some point. So they actually, after Neumann got his parachute and stepped back for a year, they created a special purpose acquisition company, a SPAC, and it was called the BOWX, which is an interesting word, the BOWX acquisition company, to essentially be the bridge to take it public for the second go round, which happened, this was in the fall of 2021. And within this SPAC, UBS Bank was the sole financial and capital markets advisor to BOWX. And then SoftBank was also playing a role. So it wasn't like SoftBank just walked away from WeWork, like it was still there, but I hadn't seen UBS in there before. So I think like UBS having this lending relationship with Neumann and WeWork and being part of the SPAC feels significant, because when I guess I'll get to this in a second. We'll talk, but about ICSO Foundation, UBS. I have a slide here that's saying it's joined the United Nations Global Investors Alliance for Sustainable Development. This was in 2020, the summer of 2020, that the UK pension fund was putting 5.5 billion into this UBS climate fund. So UBS was going out in a big way in climate. And anyway, I'll include this like as a link. This is something I sent to Leo, but it's essentially a pitch book for venture philanthropy by UBS Bank around biodiversity, connecting economies with the environment, investing in scalable approaches. So, anyway.
And that's why I included them, or like got that clip earlier of the members for the task force for nature-related disclosures, because UBS was a part of that too, which is all the stuff that you're talking about, and which I'm sure we'll talk about with IXO or ICSO. Is ICSO how you say it? ICSO.
Do you see the logo? It's very small there, but let me see if this has a bigger.
Yeah, with the three.
So it's keys, right? It's keys, and you know, it's just. I think I talked about this with Jason before, but you know, Adam Neumann in the talk with Mark Andreessen, he had this very strange anecdote about like knowing your neighbors, and like Americans don't know their neighbors because you don't have to, but in Israel where he grew up, like definitely everybody knows their neighbors. In fact, like when you need salt, you go to your neighbor's house and you knock on their door, and if they're not there, well, you know where the key is, and so you open the door and they're not home, and you take all their salt, to your house and you don't give it back. And when the neighbor says like, oh, where's my salt? Oh, Adam took it, haha. And it was just the most strange thing, because like we have these stories of like, oh, can I borrow like a cup of sugar or some milk, or I don't know, like it's usually borrow and it's usually not salt. And like, why would you take all the salt? Like it's a very strange like story. But and it turns out like that salt has a lot of symbolic connections to like earth and the feminine and moon and different things. But I was also thinking about the key, like, where your neighbor's keys are, and you can just go in and take their stuff. And then UBS, like their logo is these 3 keys. And then all of this stuff is sort of dependent on this idea of your private key. And anyway, I found all this thing about keys kind of interesting. Even the safety deposit box, right? The whole Swiss safety deposit box ideal, like this, that your digital identifier will be like supposedly your safety deposit box, but don't give Adam Newman your key. Don't let him know where your key is.
Steal all your
steal
salt,
all your stuff.
all your salt tokens.
All your salt. So this is a slide. So this is before I got to know you, Leo, but my first entry into the blockchain space was like watching that World Bank New America thing, and like smack in the middle was Sean Conway saying for Trust Lab, like, oh, let me tell you about Amply, and we're putting, preschoolers on blockchain to earn social capital. And that was just like, what is that? Like, like you're in the room, like as a young guy, so like, maybe there's some governance options. And I'm like, what? Like, don't put children on put that down. Like, it's just so funny, like how people's life experience, like how, like what brings them into the space and then where they go. And so, but then I found that like when I was looking at their connections with Sean Conway and IXO Foundation and Amply and Innovation Edge, but they were also partnered with UBS Optimus on smart blockchain bonds. So I was coming in the door with pay for success knowledge and social impact bond knowledge, and I didn't know so much about blockchains, but I'm like, oh my gosh, you could automate these things on a distributed ledger technology system. Like, oh, that's not, and Palantir's involved, right? Like that's a problem. Yeah. But yeah, like they're all sitting around, talking about this future of smart impact bond technology. And, and it was like, and then I found out about their links with Shanghai City, in Hong Kong, and that they're like much further along, and they're connecting with like, again, community, voluntarism, like cooperatives, informal economy, tokenizing informal economic relationships, and
time banking is a big one there with Shanghai City. And
so I feel like this UBS relationship is really important, because they're like the direct line into this automated bonds. And then later on, like there's some connections, I don't know, we were talking about Bancor and like liquidity and like moving tokens around. And I feel like, it's weird because like Philadelphia has these sister cities programs, like where you like, oh, there's a little park downtown and it's like, these are our sister cities. I don't even know what that means, but like, imagine if somehow your haul-on 15-minute neighborhood unit was like connected to some like you're in downtown Detroit remade as a blockchain Techtopia or whatever, and like then you're connected to like Curacao and some food forest, and like you guys are exchanging, like your behavior in your pod affects their behavior in their pod, and like you could create these artificial like energetic ties across things, like I don't know, like and again,
I mean, I feel like that's what the investing in the fractionalized land of Curacao, it's like the same, you could. Yeah, I mean,
but people aren't going to have real money. I mean, a lot of real money. The coin of the realm will be your behavior. Like, have you behaved? And I keep going back to, for me, like my stupid recycle bin. Like Wharton came up with this recycle bank points where you would get a barcode on your recycle bin, and they would say, oh, if your neighborhood does good at recycling, you can earn credits and then redeem them for certain items. Like not everything, it wasn't like money, but you could get a discount on a movie ticket or like these certain things. And no one used them that way because you don't recycle for that reason. Like you don't, but it was an early pilot of cybernetics. Like it was simply a stupid sticker on the recycle bin. But it had all these dynamics of like your behavior reflects on your community and the bonus points, and it's all supposed to be sustainable, but it wasn't, because most of the recycling got thrown away. because there was no market
Right.
for it.
Exactly.
Anyway, yeah. And so I just, on this one side, I have something about Cello. I think Cello was, is Cello working with IXO? It was saying Gold Standard. Gold Standard is the first major registry to experiment with an impact tokenization project in Thailand in partnership with IXO Foundation and South Pole. The World Bank's Climate Warehouse is nearing completion and slated for December launch. And then they're all meeting at the Cello Salon, Beyond Carbon Refi Cap.
So the Climate Warehouse is, I mentioned it earlier, is the World Bank's like blockchain system for aggregating like all the different carbon credit registries in the world and stuff. I didn't know that.
I'll send you this article.
So
yeah, I was trying to sort of poke around and sort of see like how these things were interconnected. But
I mean, it's because like what IXO does is the whole impact verification thing. It's the same exact. It's what Gold Standard does. It's just they do it for carbon credits. So it makes sense that they would be doing the same exact thing and creating like what IXO would bring is making the financial instruments to like initially fund the impact projects. Okay. And then, so that's the smart impact bond.
Yeah.
And then the data would feed in and affect the parameters of the bond and stuff. Yeah. And it's like,
I mean, because it seems to me like essentially what's coming with regenerative finance is just like an infinite number of smart impact bonds, like micro smart impact bonds. Like I was thinking them as like big things, like, oh, we're investing in the human capital of like this entire cohort of young people or something. But it could actually just be micro deals, like all these sort of little micro deals that are happening. It's like, I didn't understand that at the time. So this is just like hitting on the fact that, so Adam Newman, when he got out of WeWork, he got a big pile of money, maybe not as big as they were initially talking about, but it said he cashed out $700 million from WeWork, and he's still the largest shareholder in the company. So he's not really separate from it. Like he's still a shareholder, and he hired Ilan Stern to run his office, and that he had come out of the Soros family office. So I found that the name of the family office, his foundation or investment firm, the 166 2nd Avenue, and interesting, I was trying to figure out what that was, but evidently it's like the dumpy apartment he was in New York when he was going to school with his wife. So 166 2nd Avenue was the apartment that he lived in like sometime after 2009, which, I know, like, I feel like it's in, like, I'm living in dog years and other people, but like 2009 doesn't seem like that long ago for him to like do all these things, but I guess it really was. So I'm going to run this clip. This is from 2013. So like pretty much a decade ago, right? This is of George Soros. Now I had done a blog post at the time talking about like him mining the base of the economic pyramid, which is how they describe it, like the most impoverished people for money. And this is the setup for the new economic paradigm, right? The circular economy, the donut economy, the regenerative finance economy, and so that this is the aftermath of the global economic takedown, was to rebuild. But we can be sure that the guy who shorted the British pound for $1 billion is not in this just for like global goodwill. But they need to pivot the narrative from mega capitalism, right? Like predatory giant multinational capitalism into a more cooperative model. Like they need for people to believe that what is coming next is something that is for the collective good. And that's why like all we're seeing like coming out about the public goods funding, right? The commons, the tokenized commons, that you have to pay very careful attention to the language, because literally the people who are funding that narrative were the same people who would like bet against toddlers. So
economic theory has to be rethought from the ground up. The prevailing paradigm of efficient market.
Did you get that? The ground up, Leo?
Yeah.
That's really good. Given everything, like you have to actually have the ground on blockchain. It's really from the ground up. That's really good.
Hypothesis, rational choice theory has actually run into bankruptcy, very similar to the bankruptcy of the global financial system after Lehman Brothers. The first phase of INET was to show the bankruptcy of the existing. And that I think...
So they had to bankrupt it, and then they had to make it really obvious that it was over. It was so bankrupt, right? And so, like, we need the transparency of the blockchain.
I hate to use this term, mission accomplished. That phase is now pretty well done as far as INET is concerned. We are now entering the phase where we have to produce new theories. It's now the constructive phase. It's primarily directed at the academia, at the economics departments of universities, and there we now have a senior fellow, Lord Adair Turner, joining us, who will be in charge of developing that aspect of INET. In the long term, I hope that this very rapid development can be maintained. Fundamental rethinking of the assumptions and axioms on which economic theory has been based, because economics has been trying to come up with universally valid laws similar to Newtonian physics. And that...
The physics part, that's really important, the physics, yeah. The social physics and the environmental physics, everything connected in the cybernetics.
I think is an impossibility. So you need a new approach with different methods and also different criteria of what's acceptable.
Yeah. And then the new criteria is sustainability, right? This is everything aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals. So, I mean, it's amazing every time I go back and listen to that. Now, for people who, I want to emphasize, so INET and Soros, they were the major funders of Jim Heckman at the University of Chicago, who developed the Heckman equation, which will be the basis of betting on children as their character change for global financial markets. So like the Jim Heckman, like, and I remember at the time, because they sell you a certain story, right? They're like, oh, Soros is the left billionaire, da da da. Oh, University of Chicago is the Milton Friedman School of Economics. Like, they're opposite. But no, they're actually not, because he's funding the whole program in the Milton Friedman School of Economics. And I would have to say, like, I can put a link to the paper that I wrote about INET, but like I found their 990 for one of the years, and I think they're actually based in Oxford, which now that I think about the whole effective altruism and the Future of Humanity Institute and everything, that makes sense. But you could just see the payouts of all the economists that, like, there were like 200, and they each got like $50,000. And so, like, when people are like, oh, Soros is like funding Antifa, like, no, he's buying economists. Like, and they're buying economists to tell the new story. Like, there is a different set of criteria that is being used, but it is one that will turn the world into something that fits into a physics equation. So.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's it. And complexity economics is one of the big areas that they're involved with, which is agent-based modeling. And, you know, the agent-based modeling is both modeling in ecosystem services and in human capital valuation. So that modeling behavior can happen at all levels.
Yeah, and then like mapping out the potential emergent behavior from
alternative futures,
agents interactions, different futures, and that's all.
And you know, and that's the thing. Like when I sit with like what NVIDIA is about, right? Like these high performance graphics cards that I think on the one hand are pitched as like for gaming environments, right? Like straight, like we don't understand actually how much of this is supposed to be a game. But the NVIDIA is the simulation modeling and the high power like supercomputing. So it's kind of wild to think about like, well, what if the company that was sort of the core vehicle for gaming, like video game software, is actually running the planetary computer? Like it's because it seems like that's what's coming.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty, if you look at all the supercomputer, I mean, not that I've looked at all the supercomputers, but a lot of different ones, like Yeah, in the Netherlands, it's all about the biocomputation, like getting all the species and all the different traits of all the different species, and then making them computable in the cloud framework by different supercomputers. Oak Ridge these days, I forget what it is. I mean, they have one of the like largest supercomputers in the world, they claim, and they do a lot of this sort of stuff. It's like simulation modeling, local economics, catastrophe, migratory movements of people, and like,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, and this is a slide from a talk given in March of 2022, so it's not that old. It's by INET, and it's on regenerative economics, a necessary paradigm shift for a world in crisis. So regenerative finance, regenerative economics. I'm just going to read a little bit. This is from the transcript of this talk. I'm trying to remember who the guy is. The John Fullerton, the founder of the Capital Institute, discusses the urgent need for a new paradigm of economic thinking modeled on living systems instead of Newtonian physics, which he calls regenerative economics. So it says the DeFi movement really, I think, is a response to the lost trust of the financial system, which is what Soros was just saying. I think the financial crisis was sort of the final stake in the heart of any notion of trust in the financial system. So that's the blockchain is going to renew the trust, right? What is fascinating is that the blockchain technology actually seems to enable the possibility of a more regenerative financial system if the regenerative principles are wired into the DNA of new currencies, which is kind of creepy if you think about it, like wiring DNA into currency and like what that means about biocomputation. There are some really thoughtful people in the crypto world who are very intrigued with the idea of coding directly into new currency the patterns and principles of living systems. So this is a long way of saying I think the shot has been fired. My bet is that if we can land the idea that healthy living systems behave in certain ways, then we certainly can understand we will be able to co-create a system that reflects that and will do a better job than just trying to regulate a system that's now dominated by lost trust and malfeasance. So yeah.
There you go.
How healthy systems behave and coding the principles into the money. Like that's, I don't know.
That's exactly what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Pretty much verbatim.
And
Metrics,
the whole, like all of the Will Ruddick, grassroots economics, like even think grassroots, right? Like it's economics, but they're invoking the environment, like the connection between people and the environment. And it's hard because like I know you and I are both on the same page. Like we're not saying that there aren't terrible problems with the current system.
Of course.
It's just, I think there are some people out there who might just say, well, like that all of this is bunk. And I'm like, no, like I don't know how much of all of the specific, but I know that like we're not actually foregrounding like a balanced relationship with nature. But these guys aren't the ones that we should put in charge of doing it. Like in my opinion, like. Especially because people don't understand the implications. Like they don't understand that this is actually doing a giant simulation model of the planet, predicting future outcomes, and then steering our behaviors of ourselves and nature to accomplish a certain end that's going to be beyond the control,
control or comprehension of people,
of any of us. It's not. There's not informed consent on this, and this is. This is John Clippinger, and he's at MIT Media Lab and has been working with Sandy Pentland on social physics and digital identity. And this was a talk he gave in 2017 at the City Science Summit. And he was sort of rolling out like this plans for digital identity, right? Like I wish I'd seen this talk before, but the images from his slide deck, one of them is the city commons and blockchain, autonomous trust for joy and the public good. And there's like a little girl like with her hands open, like waiting for the leaves to fall. So autonomous trust for joy and the public good. So that's exactly what they're saying. Like we're going to break it. We're going to make people trust nothing. And then we're going to give them the vehicle for their trust. One of the other slides says virtualization of everything. And then, there's the feature slide with his head, which is literally like done up in some sort of like polyhedron geometric planes. It's sort of like a creepy cartoon face of him being represented, that he is with the Token Commons Foundation in ID3. So I think that's just sort of how it proceeds. We break it and then we provide the solution that we want to
Do you know if the Tokens Common Foundation is the same group in MIT doing the CBDC stuff for primarily the Boston Fed? Is that the same?
I don't know. Like, they're very covert, actually. Like the Token Commons Foundation, it's hard to pin it down. So I actually, in my map, like I did a bunch of screenshots of the 990s and various other things to try to fit it together, because there's such generic words. Like there's the Token Engineering Foundation, like there's a couple other people, and I'm like, is this the same? Like, no, it's not. Like, but I definitely found the 990 that said the ID3 has changed into the Token Commons Foundation, and it has a footprint in Switzerland and Cambridge and now Austin.
Yeah, that might be different than the group, like the group that's specifically all about the CBDC.
I mean, I think the digital currency
research, and they have like a journal now too.
Okay. Yeah,
like,
if
that's
you
where
have
I found
something.
that. Oh, sorry, just like that crazy paper from I think Argonne National Labs about and making what was it? So it's something about like quantum information theory and making tokens and free energy and stuff that was just like totally bonkers, but that was published to them.
Oh, is that the one where we were talking about, like, you could outsource the wiping of like the Maxwell's demons or whatever, and that we could, well, see, but that's like, I mean, I think that's worth going back to, Leo. I'm sorry I didn't actually put that in, but like, so this idea was like their search for free energy, and that there's this box and this Maxwell's demon that would have a door, and like this premise that it would capture all of the energy on the bouncing around molecules of free energy into one side of the box, and then the energy contained would push against a barrier and create energy in that motion. But then you actually have to erase the information to start over to keep it going, and the information erasure would cost energy, so it actually isn't free energy. But if you could outsource the wiping of the energy, then you could, on blockchain, you could get the free energy. And so, but like the outsourcing feels like it's something that like then would be set aside for people or other agents in the universe to do something to erase the information on behalf of this free energy system. Like, oh, it wouldn't bother you to do this.
I can't. I'm super impressed that you remembered that. That's exactly what it was.
Yeah, but see, and then I was thinking about like the whole digital twinning and the blockchain identity. So like, what if somehow they have imagined this crazy free energy machine, but involves people in smart city neighborhoods doing something, right? But like maybe it's like, when you brush your teeth, you're actually erasing information, or somehow they're able to like link it on blockchain and be like,
totally.
You don't even notice that you're erasing information. Like you're simply just like, I don't know, doing your treadmill, like your hour on the treadmill.
All the stuff you've looked at, the piezoelectric.
Because they would gamify it. Like if they were going to do that, they would make it into a game, so you would agree to do it. Yeah, but like again, none of us are actually going to understand like that the built environment is becoming this computing module. And this is actually, so this is an image I took from the UPS Impact Philanthropy white paper, and I didn't actually have this word before, and it's amazing to you. I think, again, I guess this is the way words can make spells or structure the way you think. Like if there's something out there but you don't have a word for it, you're like, it's just, you can't really get your arms around it. But if there's a word for it, you're like, oh yes, of course. So this is a graph that is talking about like a transition of like making your business more sustainable through ESG finance. And how it's done through grant making and impact investing. And you go from non-sustainable financial models through to like strong ESG businesses. But underneath it all is they're talking about building what's called a social purpose organization, which to me, they call it an SPO. Like that also feels a little bit like a benefit corporation or something, like some incorporation that's meant to have a particular purpose for good, air quotes around that. And so I could see like these units, these neighborhood units somehow being like, because a lot of times they're run through like these real estate investment trust partnerships, like that you could set up a financial vehicle to redevelop a mixed use community, like and again, I saw this in the University City Science District just the other day. Like you create, you bulldoze everything, you ground up, create a purpose-built mixed community, and you could structure it maybe financially as a DAO or some sort of blockchain system. And you could say that it had a social purpose. You could say like, oh, the purpose of living in this community is to do XYZ. This is our mission. And you could even maybe frame it as a cooperative, right? Or a kibbutz. Like that's the whole thing Jason and I talked about, the kibbutz model. Like you could frame it as a collective purpose good, not only for the collective, but for the environment, right? Like how we live in our space is actually going to benefit the environment in XYZ ways, and then tabulate it on a blockchain. Like if you come to this collective, you commit to not having a car, or you commit to like getting 30% of your groceries at the organic food cooperative or something like that. And then people opt in to that community, and then they get some sort of equity flow out the back of it in some sort of token. So like for me, having this idea that UBS is thinking through, you could, I mean, they're not specifically talking about a real estate development, but for me, like with let me think about flow and what the heck Adam Newman and Mark Andreessen are up to, and knowing that Mark's wife, Laura Arrillaga Andreessen, set up Impact Finance. I'm like, I feel like that's if I wasn't trying to stop this, I feel like I have a mind enough that I could probably make a lot of money doing this.
Oh, definitely. At this point.
I'm like, it's just not, like I can get in their head and see what I feel like what they're about. So this is from, this is something called SoPact, which is, again, a data dashboard for the human side. And they're talking about, like, Adam Newman kept saying, I'm not a real estate company, I'm a technology company. And they're like, no, you're a real estate company. He's like, no, I'm a technology company. And so they're talking about building layers of impact for quality of life. And this is specifically connected to the housing sector. It was started in 2015 to facilitate transparent impact measurement and management with their software platform to get to make measuring, managing, and communicating impact easier. And so here I'm going to just have this little clip about him talking about relationship management.
So it's almost like you're a real estate company wrapped in this sort of in this tech sheen.
So we're definitely not a real estate company. We are a community of creators. We create environment for entrepreneurs and freelancers. We leverage technology to connect people. And it's a new way of working. And just like Uber is the sharing economy for cars and City Bike for bicycle, we're the sharing economy for space.
Do you buy the properties?
So we definitely do not buy the property. That, again, would make us a real estate company.
Exactly.
We create long-term leases with landlords, and then we take the space and we break it up and we create the community and the connections that happen between our members.
So they create the community. So they don't even own it, which is interesting. So I wonder who is going to be owning the things. BlackRock, probably.
BlackRock, yeah. Or Blackstone. I think they're the ones.
Yeah, Blackstone's the housing, but probably together.
Oh, housing.
Yeah,
right.
Blackstone is the housing, and BlackRock is just all the money.
Yeah.
But yeah, they create an experience, right? And so I can see how, especially, I mean, no offense, but in the whole culture war narrative of where your identity, be a good person, wear your identity, good people behave like this, here are the rules. And then you want to be with people who are like you, and don't be with people who aren't like you. That would be uncomfortable. So come and be here. And that's sort of, again, building off of the whole, what Newman was pitching was community, but a connected community with managed relationships. So, anyway, so this is just, this is from the IPO, I think. I think this is from the IPO. Let me see. Yes, this is from the SEC. So I thought that this I put an air quote, for parenthetical statements, what I thought these things are about. So I'm just going to read this out. 9 years ago, we had a mission to create a world where people work to make a life. So in that, I put surveillance of everything. They want to surveil you at work and surveil you in your life. Not just a living. We believe that if we created a community that helped people live life with purpose, we could have a meaningful impact on the world. So that's the impact data for machine learning. From the moment we started, we had conviction that there was an entrepreneurial spirit. That's agents in the ant game that was underserved. We knew that there were creators all around the world who were looking for a better workplace solution at a lower price. And again, I didn't put this in, but the creative economy, this idea of creators, that's very intrinsically linked to the metaverse. We actually have to create the metaverse, so the creative economy is a piece of that. Our community team embodies the energy and spirit of our diverse membership base. So I put in thermoeconomics and complexity theory, right? Like your energy and how you fit into the game. They are not only strong operators, but mission-driven individuals, and that's goal-oriented behavior, inspired by the opportunity to connect and empower, which Jason and I talked about this actor network theory, which non-humans and humans are all equal members in like complex interrelationships, which would be you and your built environment. They work each day to support our community holistically, understand our members' personal and professional goals, program local experiences and events. That totally works with what is coming next. Recommend services and make introductions among members. And I put in there distributed cognition, this idea of like we're part of a largerly globally connected brain that can help each other succeed. We integrate community technology across all of our operations. And so I put in there Web3 and digital identity to further enhance the value we deliver to our members. Our WeWork app enables our members to easily book space, connect with other members for advice or services, and discover events and activities. To create the best member experience, we strive to pair human judgment and creativity with algorithms that amplify ideas quickly. And I put that in like cyborg, hybrid life superorganism and globally. Algorithms amplifying, yeah. Our community teams, which I put in swarms intelligence, provides a rich source of programming ideas with an average of over 2,500 events every week. We can develop insights quickly on what works best. And I put that genetic algorithms for members with select interests. So there's all of these sort of ideas like the underlayer. And I don't know, like Leo, does that make like...
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And that's why I was like, oh.
But it's like, you don't need to know the subtext. Like if you don't know all of this is happening in the background, you'll just be like, oh, well, this is just fluff or whatever.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, exactly. Some technology bullshit or whatever. Yeah, I mean,
so anyway, so that brings us back to Evelyn Hutchinson and his irradiated Connecticut pond. So I just wanted to like sort of bring this back to like the metabolism and the carbon cycle, right? Because it is like the carbon, right? The whole decarbonization, like all the way back. He was a Yale professor. He taught Howard Odum, and the Odum brothers were sort of the key figures in establishing the environmental movement and like the core theories and and energy, I guess. He was like the energy economics was a key.
Yeah, and so like out of to go back a little bit, one of the right after the Second World War and the Atomic Energy Commission, the Manhattan Project turning into the Atomic Energy Commission and stuff, and looking for peaceful uses of nuclear energy. One of the main ones that they were really pushing was the use of radioisotopes in medicine and really science research all over, but especially biology and ecology, which was using isotopes, atoms with different number of neutrons that are traceable throughout a system because of the radiation that they let off. So you could see it as it moves through the body or plant or tree or whatever. And that's where, like you said, the basis of really like ecology as a science, and the Atomic Energy Commission was really the only largest funder of that research. And Oak Ridge National Laboratories is where a lot of the radioisotopes were first produced, and where a lot of that first ecological and biological use of radioisotopes. And for seeing like they didn't know how photosynthesis worked. This was later on, but like how they figured out the chemical pathways of photosynthesis was through radioisotopes. So it's like a pretty big deal in terms of the development of we don't
know. I mean, the track and trace, like this idea of having so now we don't have to dump radioactive material into systems. We just have a phone, right? Like that we have an identifier that tracks and traces and creates patterns. It was sort of like in this pond, it was patterns of like energy transfer of the living systems in the pond and how it interacted with the environment. And then it was also part of like niches. You would identify how to maximize biodiversity, which is a reason why they're so interested in the rainforests. Like in genetic is that it's a very intense like circular redistribution of resources like in the rainforest.
Yeah, in like a very unique way with very specific organisms on these like complex pathways on how.
So you could imagine like
good.
flow, like this whole thing, right? The carbon flow is that like if what they're about is creating hybrid human machine through built environment sensor networks outside in robots, like niches in a social computer, like some sort of like giant social computational organism, like you could have like quote unquote DAO cooperative smart housing that had a certain kind of like capital, like human capital or natural capital that could be like tapped on in this. Like you would create a niche, right? You would be like, oh, and that's why I think the libertarian ethos or this sovereignty or the government, let's do the free market principles are so central to this, is because like I even found a quote with Jason. I was talking a lot about the kibbutz structure and how a capitalist kibbutz is what Newman and his partner were talking about, and that like the Cato Institute was just uplifting that. Like that sounds great. Like we just love lots of different living like opportunities. Like let's just try a lot of different things, but it's all going to be within a tracked and traced environment. Like so. No one's going to tell you, by the way, like when you get, you know, a bonus on your lease, signing your lease to move into this place, like you're part of the, you know, X quadrant niche DAO super organism unit. Like it's no, I don't think it's going to like have maybe in the fine print somewhere, but you know.
Yeah, it won't feel, you have no idea.
So this is the energy economics. Essentially, it's just a map that I was talking about. I think we talked about it before in our atomic ecology thing, but looking at like the natural capital ecosystem services and ecosystem valuation, and that it has this thermoeconomic inputs, and that Howard Odum and Hutchinson were sort of all part of this idea, like again, an energy currency. There's like a well-established understanding both like in the environmental movement about this energy economics. And so once the built environment is integrated into that, and even at WeWork, this is an article, like they're saying that it was a great example of the sharing economy, and that this WeGrow, which was the educational unit, and like the We Live, that it was sort of a test bed. That's really what Newman was doing, was sort of this energy test bed. And you know, Odum went on to do this work around energy equations, which, you know, I can't pretend to actually understand what these energy equations are like, but reducing life like to a system of energy flows. This is a chapter from one of his books called Self-Organization and Maximum Empower. And he's simulating a model of evolution. And so I think a lot of what I've been trying to deal with lately is around complexity theory and like integrals and like emergence, right? That's what Laszlo's been looking at, the systems theorists. They're somehow trying to like catalyze conditions, but at the border between order and chaos, that will lead to some sort of like profound jump, I think, in like what they imagine humanity could or should be. But it has to be done through a coordinated means. And I think they're looking to use technology, this distributed technology, to accomplish it somehow.
And that comes into all the eugenics stuff that you've talked about.
Optimization
Before, and it's
like they're like
optimization is the new eugenics, and
yeah,
that's been the plans, man in the biosphere, and
but like our relationship to the environment like is really critical. Like that is like I think it's like saying that the whole is more than the sum of the parts. Like if you just looked at man or just looked at the environment, you would be limited, like in terms of your options, in terms of recombining systems to create some sort of new emergent behavior. So I think they need to have both, and they need them linked. And the Sustainable Development Goals are a way of creating that like bridge between the two.
Yep.
And I know we're running tight on time, but this is just one of these slides from like complex morphogenetic engineering, this like bottom up, and like, oh, you wouldn't have an architect like put together parts to make a chicken. You just start with an embryo, right? Or they want it to grow itself. And I think that's the thing that it's really is that within the token engineering and this idea of framing it as a like free choice and volunteerism and the commons, that I think that they think that they can get enough buy-in for people to agree to like pick up the digital wallet or pick up the thing and participate in the game. And so much of the resistance narrative, I think, is like totalitarian, like top down. We're going to come crush you and make you eat bugs. And I'm not saying none of that's going to happen, but I think that they do want people to want to agree to do it, and so they're being very cagey about how to tell the stories to get people to go along, and that they're going to find a way to bring together the like left anarchisty kind of thing and the conservative libertarian side, and like try to bring that all into the token domain.
Yeah, they want to make it the game in a way that it's emergent, in a way that, you know, as more people buy in and contribute, that it'll make itself, and they'll make it more and want to make it more. Not,
yeah,
like you said, it's not just the CBDC telling you that you can't buy beef or something. Like,
yeah, it's more complicated. It's more nuanced. And then this is about embodied computing. This is a slide. This guy it's wild. He has connections to Oak Ridge. He's out of UT Knoxville. And this complex systems and morphogenesis, like embodied computing. So like what comes after Moore's law, like we're all part of the computer, and like massive parallel units and self-making computation. And this happens between us and the environment, but we're all like hooked up to sensors so that the AI can sit on our shoulder and look. And again, just this is all going to come out through like the Web3. Again, like it's crazy to me that all the resistance, like, you know, 90% of it is involved in some sort of blockchain media or crypto shilling or something. But like this is Andreessen Horowitz is like fully running, you know, the Web3 rollout. And here I just have the mobile wallets. I'm going to go through this quick because like I know we're wrapping up. But that's your track and trace device. Here's the Serafu. This is the Will Ruddock, you know, building this out in, is it in Kenya, right? And you can see like this is how he models this rainbow systems of dots, that this is the community inclusion currency in Kenya. And so they're modeling it literally looks like an embryo, like this embryogenesis is like what they're trying to sort of envision.
And there's a recent presentation by Will Ruddock where he opens on like their work with grassroots economics work as like, we just play games with people. Like that's literally what he says. It's like,
here's have some yarn. They make it seem so wholesome. Like
it's like we just run games. It's like, yeah, well,
exactly.
Yes, you are.
Well, just a pitch for Leo for your work over at Silicon Icarus. You know, I have a link there about, you know, how the global brain economics works. That Andreessen Horowitz is a major backer of Cello. So Mark Andreessen is they're the partner in this Flow project, and so this is the app that I mentioned earlier that WeWork has this app. It's ironic because I guess I heard that most people didn't actually want to use the app. Like it wasn't like they wanted to make it a social media thing, and it wasn't really used that way, even though they talked about it as though it were. But you did need to use it to book the space, and that they were working with MasterCard on payment systems. Frictionless payment systems, linking Internet of Things, blockchain, and they had their own lab to work on payment systems. So this doesn't just happen with some fly-by-night enterprise. Like this MasterCard WeWork partnership, let's see, this article was from 2017. So like in very early, like just making things easy, just giving you flexibility in this smart environment. But they were working on a frictionless payment system, which is pay as you go. So like as soon as you had to do an authentication as soon as you came into the building to verify your identity, and the payment started ticking, like you would pay for how long you were in the space. But also in the space was an honesty market where you could pick up office supplies or food, and then it would be credited, like debited from your account. You know, which when I saw this, I'm like, this is it, right? Like, so this isn't just meant to be for your WeWork office. Like this is meant to be for life, like everything. Mm-hmm. And so that's why health passports, right? Like that's why we need a unique identifier. So all of this stuff, all of the Web3 backend can happen.
Today than 10 years ago. So I actually think it's a better idea today than it was. The obvious lesson is community. I think on top of everything that Mark just said, and I'm not going to repeat any of it, but that's the data that pushed us into being as interested as we were in this category. But on top of all of that, for a lot of time, I think a lot of people argued. Howard Schultz used to say Starbucks is the third place. I remember once having an argument with him. I told him WeWork is the third place. He was like, Starbucks is the third place. Well, I think the first place turned out to be the third place. I think the home is the most important thing. I think COVID taught us that. I think you can take your work into your home, but you can't take your home into your work. And that's affecting a lot of change. Also, to put a little numbers behind what Mark is saying, 70% of 35-year-olds and youngers are currently renters. They don't actually buy. And this number is not because of the interest rates that have been going up over the past 6 to 10 months. This is a number from 12 months ago. And we believe that that number is actually only going to grow. So 70% are renters. You said it's a big piece of their spend. It's about a third of their total wallet. So you have this huge asset class, largest in the world. 70% of its users are renters. It's a third of their spend. And yet they're not getting an experience that is actually up to par, not to talk.
That's the shtick, right? Nobody's going to own a house anymore. And we need, you need to take whatever you were doing at work into your house. So this is this weird equity piece. So this is like where I'm like, I sent this to you, Leigh. I'm like, what is he up to? I really feel like I have a better sense now working through it, like what he's up to. But here they're talking about it giving people equity.
Well, we have 4 pillars as we're looking at the business today. We have the first one, which is a branded technology-first management company that actually runs the buildings. We have an asset management.
So branded technology-first management company. So that's a DAO, right? That's going to be a DAO. Probably somehow.
Eventually.
Eventually.
Real estate fund or real estate company that actually owns the buildings. And something cool about our new business, we actually own buildings together already. And then we have a financial services company. So number 1, management company, branded technology first. Number 2, real estate asset management, a company that can buy real estate and asset manage real estate. Number 3, financial services. And the 4th pillar is this mechanism that's going to take some of the value and share it with the value creators. And what we get so excited about the vision of Flow and the business of Flow is that it's actually a flywheel. If we can actually create a better experience in the building, then the building performs better and makes a higher NOI. If the building makes a higher NOI, then we'll be able to raise more money and buy more buildings. If we buy more buildings, then we'll be able to run more buildings and have more users in those buildings. And those users are going to start using our financial services. Now, the reason they're going to use the financial services, the first thing you do in buildings is you charge rent every month. And that's 35% of their total wallet. So
I'm thinking that this is going to be a UBI scenario. Like they're primarily framing this as like upwardly mobile professionals and like a quote unquote luxury, whatever passes for luxury, like apartment, like upwardly mobile. But I think actually the market is an affordable workforce housing and people who are going to have a UBI element. So when he's talking like rent payment and financial wellness services and things like that, like they'll probably, like, if you get a UBI, they're probably going to just do like a direct debit out of it into the rental thing. And then the rest of your money, you'll be managed for like, if you have good financial behaviors.
A payments company that's charging your rent already has a real relationship with the user. If that financial services company is going to do what we want it to do and create services that are actually meaningful, we think of it as financial wellness, and give services that are actually meaningful, then that again is going to drive more users.
Yeah, so financial wellness. And just to finish up, here's the graphic. Like this is just the close up from that SOCAP, and they were working with impact management projects, so they were connected to the big players. Quality of life outcomes analysis, and it has this like radial dial thing. Confidence level, job readiness, financial readiness, self-esteem, and the thing is like they're gonna. So low. It's just so. Yeah, so like they're gonna have smart technologies to sort of manage you, or how many questionnaires you fill out or how many lessons you did, and like I feel like this is going to be embedded within this social purpose economy, and this is just something I pulled out from. It's actually English, but it was from March of last year. British Columbia, Canadian, the largest federal financial cooperative in Canada. In social purpose, that they're working on transitioning to being a social purpose organization in connection with the United Way, and that they want to grow the social purpose economy in terms of like collective action and addressing vital social issues. And so like housing is a huge social issue. Like that's one of the things they talk about, like the lack of housing. So I'm not going to run this, but it's just like more sustainability stuff. And this is the SOPACT. It's headquartered in San Francisco, and they were founded in 2016. And like the impacts they're looking at are economic development, affordable housing, diversity, health and well-being, and financial inclusion. So I think the FinClusion, like his hat tip to financial wellness, is part of that. And this is just back from that Seattle Housing Cooperative. They're talking about like getting impact data that we need to we need to use what we have learned to steer our action. So steering and things that they're looking at, like gender identity of residents, which is kind of weird. Like that people feel safe, that people feel like they have well-being, that they have community amenities. But they were talking about the risk to their impact. And essentially, like you were saying, it's like risk to not getting enough data or the data being mixed up, not the risk of the actual world, just the data flow. And they're like, oh my gosh, like what happens if we don't collect enough high quality data? Like what happens if we don't educate people to why we need the data? Like what happens, like how can we partner to educate our management systems that we need to get all of this data? If the Homeowners Development Corporation gets sufficient if they get sufficient feedback, to offset the risk of not getting sufficient feedback, we use incentives and collaborated with property managers to create frequent co-branded email communications. Like, I don't know how people like are responding to that, but so anyway, this is just the close here. This is with equity. So like he's talking about giving people like an experience, and like you won't own anything, but maybe you'll have some equity. So this is from the Hulu documentary about the promises made to the workers at WeWork who didn't get the golden parachute of $700 million and were promised equity in something that totally didn't pan out.
And that phrase you said,
as a mission.
So that you won't own anything, but you'll have equity. I feel like it's a pretty good.
Yeah.
That's like, yeah, you'll have equity.
And that mission is world-changing. And people can buy into the mission, then they're going to come in. Then they need a culture that they're going to enjoy. To create that culture, you got to put employees first. We've given every one of our employees equity, so everyone is a partner in this business, from the porter that cleans to the community manager to the CFO and COO of the company. Everyone is a part.
But the way the stock options worked was that's not really like what would happen.
Equity was kind of a buzzword. Adam would talk about it all the time. You all have equity in the company, which I don't think is quite true. If you have stock options, you don't actually own equity in the company. You own a security that gives you an option to buy equity in the company. I would see that people didn't understand the bet that you're taking and what you're getting. It's so exciting to feel like you own something that is so famous and so talked about, so that they can say like, oh, I have equity. But if somebody actually did the math, maybe their equity's worth like $2,000. You might think that the possibility of getting a $1 million payout is far higher than it actually is in reality.
Yeah. That seems like a good closure.
Yeah.
Like people
Definitely.
don't understand the game that they're in. Like, and then you get swept up into it, right? Like of being part of something exciting and new.
Totally.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well,
I need.
Yeah, you gotta go.
Did you go?
Thank you,
Yeah.
Leo. All right.
Yeah, thank you so much. That
All
was
right,
fun.
thanks. All right,
Oh.
bye. Well, hi everybody. So we're doing a part 2. So this is the epic investigation of Adam Newman and Mark Andreessen's Flow. And so Jason and I did sort of an early a launch 3-hour exhaustive sort of looking into sort of smart environments, and the first section was looking at Flow as like, is it a real estate company or a technology company? And if it's a